Well, the day has finally come. What day is that, you might ask? Or maybe you're not asking that at all because you saw the title of this video. I have finally replayed every single Dragon Ball game on the PlayStation 2 console. Probably my favorite console of any that I've ever owned. This might seem like a silly goal to have achieved for some, but for me, it was a passion that I brought to life. All thanks to you. And you too. It all started off with replaying Sagas over 2 years ago, realizing that I didn't entirely hate the game, even though it kind of sucks in many other aspects, and also realizing that not many YouTubers ever spoke on what they did actually enjoy about the game. We all know that co-op was actually pretty cool. That being said, if you saw my ranking video for all the PS2 games, it is still my least favorite out of the whopping 9 DBZ titles on that platform, but still, each of them do have at least some redeeming qualities. And to commemorate my completion of all 9 of these, before I jump into the other consoles to follow, today I've compiled every single video I've made on that console into one lengthy video. And we're going to do them in order of release date. So you know we're starting off today with none other than Budokai 1. The original DragonBallZ Budokai is one of, if not the most important games that the franchise has ever released, not for the reasons that you might think. You see, a lot of you watching may not remember this game releasing. But if you're around my age, or possibly a little older, then you know just how big that this game was. I can remember watching the original Toonami run of DBZ when I was just a little boy in 2002, and the trailer for this spectacular game dropped. My eyes lit up with excitement because prior to this, at least in North America, all we had was the recently released Legacy of Goku and, well, a PS1 game that must not be named at this time. Needless to say, these were both underwhelming games for a variety of reasons, but this was what every DBZ fan had dreamed of. The characters looked just like the anime, and for an early PS2 game, this was remarkable. The game actually allowed you to do proper combos, and looks as if love and care was actually put into the development. You could transform mid-fight just like the anime. I mean, for this time, it was groundbreaking stuff. But to understand how this game changed the franchise, we need to take a deeper look. And while we're at it, what made this game not so good when compared to later entries? Let's find out. Before we get into the story and the gameplay, we need to talk about the intro. Rock the Dragon is an absolute banger. As a longtime DBZ fan, it hits you right in the feels with that classic after-school Toonami vibe. Dang, I really do miss this theme song. I'm also so glad they went with this instead of Chala, Hey Chala. It's just so much cooler in my opinion. When looking at the available modes, especially for this time, it blew me away. There's a total of 7 modes, 1 for every Dragon Ball. I absolutely love this, as it was and still is an incredible amount of replay value. In my opinion, this set the blueprint for future Dragon Ball games to come. The modes include Story, which in this case takes place between the Raditz and Cell Saga, for a rather underwhelming runtime, at least on the first playthrough. Next you have Duel Mode, where you can choose to battle a friend or the computer, at whichever difficulty you choose. This is also where all the stages you unlocked are accessible. Third, a mode loved and missed by oh so many, World Tournament Mode. Here you can choose 3 difficulties: Novice, Adept, and Advanced, and fight to be the best, and earn some prize money along the way. The main difference here is that you can win your fights by either KOing the opponent, as usual, or by ring out, which typically involves strategic positioning of yourself near the edge of the ring, and also avoiding this happening to yourself as well. But if that isn't enough, you also get 4 more modes. Practice Mode is Skill Shop, where you can purchase skills to use for your unlocked characters in Duel and World Tournament. Options Mode, and a super secret 7-star Dragon Ball mode. As I mentioned previously, the story starts off at Raditz. This is probably where they got the idea to almost completely omit the OG Dragon Ball from the game's storyline, as nearly every Dragon Ball game that follows this started at this very same fight. Now, it does actually begin with a Piccolo versus Goku cutscene, which is nice to see. I do wish more games would have this fight in it. At least, in my opinion, this is where the DBZ style fight started, although it is considered OG Dragon Ball still. But I do understand. This is where the story took a turn and becomes more action oriented. But still, how many times do we need to play this exact same story? I mean, it's in basically every single game besides Xenoverse, which is still kind of this story. While dated for today's standard, the cutscenes are also exceptionally well made for their time. There's also episode cards for every level, and even next episode previews when you finish one of the 3 arcs in the game. I love this, and it helped induce those feelings of late night Toonami nostalgia. It certainly feels like they're trying to tell the story, at least much more so than some future games that are just fight after fight. But still, putting myself in the shoes of a first-time DBZ viewer, I would have absolutely no clue what's going on. I mean, the pacing is super fast, and they skip so many crucial moments. It almost feels like a Kai version of DBZ Kai. Now, let's be fair, they do make up for this to a large extent with additional post-game content, but we'll come back to that. As early as the first battle, you will notice that the supers and ultimates are ridiculously difficult to pull off. I always thought these were way too much, especially as a child. While Kamehameha and some of the other characters' more basic attacks are easy enough to pull off by pressing box 4 times and then circle, the majority of everything else is just madness, especially when compared to the ease of later games in the franchise. Legitimately, some of these are hold forward while holding box, release, box, hold forward and triangle, then circle. If that sounds complicated, that's not even half of it. You have to do this while trying to not get hit, and the opponent is often blocking, which cancels out the entire attack. That being said, in the beginning, out of frustration, I mostly stuck with just Kamehameha. As I progressed though, I was determined to pull off some of the more trickier techniques. This is where training mode came into play. Seeing the inputs as I pressed them, along with the opponent not blocking or moving in any way, helped me get down the formula. There's also always little capsules on the bottom corner of the screen which coordinate with whatever super that you're trying to do. And if you get close to pulling one off, it will light up. This also helped me realize it wasn't the combinations that were difficult, it was more so the movements of the enemy that made it harder to do. And also the combinations in this game are still a bitch. Returning to the game, melee attacks are easy enough to pull off and feel very good as well. This is definitely where they found their rhythm for future games to come. As games before this, like GT Final Bout, oh, you know, maybe I'll save that for a future review. Let me know in the comments if you want to see it, but spoiler alert, the game is absolute garbage. But almost every character has extremely similar supers, exception of maybe 1 or 2 of their personal moves. Now, I know, reusing moves is common in games with a large roster. But come on, there's 24 characters here. I feel like you could have made every character a little more distinctive. That being said, the continuous blasts and a lot of the special melee attacks are the exact same, and just renamed to fit the character. This is honestly the thing that bothered me the most about this game. Another thing that irked me is that as early as the first fight, we'll notice the freaking Kamehameha is yellow. What the hell? I mean, it's just like, why did they do that? I could forgive this, but later in the story mode, you see that Cell's Kamehameha is blue. I mean, for anyone who's not a fan playing this game, who cares? Sure. But for a hardcore fan, or even a semi-casual fan, this will surely bother you throughout the entire game. Also, while we're on Cell, during gameplay, his voice stays the exact same as Imperfect Cell, even when he's in perfect form. Anyway, playing through story mode more, you come to realize, fairly quickly, that it's extremely rare to play as any character besides Goku. There's a fight with Gohan early on, sure, and then a couple fights with Piccolo in the Cell arc, and of course, you have to have the big finale, SS2 Gohan versus Cell. But I'm pretty sure that's it for the main story. The rest is strictly Goku. This again causes a lot of crucial missed moments in the series. Even in the Ginyu portion, where Goku and Ginyu change bodies, the voices stay the same. They couldn't even properly give Ginyu Goku's voice for the battle. I mean, how hard could that have been to do? In my opinion, it would have made a lot more sense to have Vegeta or even Gohan and Krillin fight in this battle. Now, to the game's defense, they do correct a lot of this in post-game story content. But even then, they only really use Piccolo for the Saiyan arc, and then Vegeta for Frieza and Cell arcs, meaning there's still about 20 or 21 characters that are almost completely unused in the game's story. But I do have to say, I really freaking love playing as Super Vegeta in this game. His hair just looks dope to me, and also, it's a form that I feel served enough purpose that it's deserving of being playable transformation in a lot more modern DBZ games. Continuing on with the post-game story mode, notice the levels you previously played and new ones will now open up, allowing you to replay any previous mission of your choosing, and also allowing you to see where these new ones fit in with the story. The coolest feature of this is that there will also be one what-if story for each of the 3 arcs, which is from the main villain of the arc's perspective.
Come on! Get down here, Baldy!
It was really cool that they allowed us to do this. I always love when games give us what-if and alternate scenarios. For Vegeta and Frieza, the stories are basically, in a nutshell, what if Vegeta and what if Frieza won their respective battles against Goku and the Z Warriors. First even ending with Vegeta turning Super Saiyan in the Saiyan arc, and the second ending with Frieza finally gaining immortality. While these seem like dreamlike scenarios for those characters, for Cell's, it's more of a nightmare. This has to be the funniest thing a Dragon Ball game has ever done. Cell legit absorbs Krillin by accident, causing him to mutate and downgrade into basically a weaker Cell Jr. Hilarious as that is, the level ends with Cell fighting Yamcha, of all people, which is actually fairly difficult. Props to Yamcha here. Then getting tri-beamed to death by Tien, only to wake up and the whole sequence was just a nightmare. I do again love this because it really could be canon. Who's to say that Cell didn't have a nightmare? Entirely plausible. Now, as usual, I don't want to spend too much time on the story because, I mean, you guys probably already know it if you're watching this video. So let's just go over what I thought was the worst and maybe the hardest level in the game. And no, it's not the special beam cannon segment, although that is a close runner-up. But for worst, it has to be the Vegeta training level. You know the one. More specifically, the burst mode segment. I'm not sure if it's just me, but I hate pulling these off. Something about timing them and then burning off the skin on the palm of my hand just to win this fight, I mean, it doesn't really seem fun for me at all. The fight after kinda sucks too. I mean, you only get 1 health bar to finish off Vegeta, who is not going to take it easy on you. So if you're playing in hard mode or anything above that, it's going to be a really tough fight. Speaking of which, the hardest level is absolutely Gohan versus Cell. Super Saiyan 2 versus Super Perfect. I almost put Frieza versus Goku for this, because that level does suck as well, but when I thought about it, this level took me forever to beat. This man kicked my ass so many damn times though, only for me to finally win in what seemed like a stroke of luck, and then having my damn game freeze right before it saved. So I had to play all over again. You also start on just enough ki to be in Super Saiyan 2, so most of the time within seconds of the game starting, if it hits you even once, you're back to SS1 or even base form. That really can be stressful. Yeah, that reminds me. Transformations. Well, of course, as you guys know, it's a Dragon Ball game, so you can transform into multiple forms per character. This game is where the formula for transformations began, that they will use for years and years to come. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, it works. But if you don't know, basically you charge up to a certain amount of key bars to transform. If the character has, or has unlocked at this point in the game, multiple forms, then you will transform to whatever form is set for that amount of key bars. What's interesting about this game in specific though, is that almost every character, and note, almost an asterisk, because not every single one, but almost every character has a transformation. That being unlocked potential for Krillin, or in Hercule's case, high tension. Giving Hercule a transformation is weird in itself, but giving Hercule his own mode, however, that's a different story. To unlock this hidden 7-star mode, you will have to compete in the World Tournament and beat both the Novice and Adept difficulties. Not only does each difficulty increase here, but each rank you go up will increase the amount of fighters and the amount of fights that you will have to go through to win. For frame of reference, Novice has 3 fights, Adept has 4, and Advanced has 5. Also, Advanced has this weird mechanic where one random fighter skips like 2 or 3 battles. Like, how is that fair in any way? Each increasing difficulty will grant you more and more prize money, which you can use in the skill shop to unlock a variety of things, including supers, items that increase your stats, and also special things like the Legend of Hercule. This mode is silly but really fun. You basically play as Hercule, who is surprisingly powerful, and you fight through all the Z Warriors one by one to get to the big man himself, Cell. Hercule will also have some hilarious one-liners and speeches in between the fights to keep you laughing and to keep the game lighthearted.
What? Already?
The biggest drawback here is that if you do die, you start all the way over from the beginning, which there's about 10 to 12 fights, so you have to play very strategically, especially in the second half where the fights get quite a bit more challenging. There also is no unlockables here for winning, at least as far as I'm aware. Like, in the story mode, you unlock characters and many items from just completing levels. I was kind of expecting some sort of reward for finishing Legend of Hercule on Adept, but I guess Hercule's rants were enough compensation for me.
That was a wimp. You two sick bald turkeys. I'll deal with you both at once.
While you might think it's over there, and for many it probably would be, there's still one more unlockable that we have yet to cover. Great Saiyaman. The inclusion of this character is quite odd to me. I mean, the story doesn't go past Cell, so why do we have a Majin Buu Saga character in the game? To unlock Great Saiyaman, you just have to finish Advanced difficulty in the tournament, which, by the way, is disgustingly hard. But if you can do it, there you go. You got Great Saiyaman, which you'll probably never use him because he's a pretty average character, but hey, you did that. One last thing, there's also DragonBallZ that you can collect, which I'm fairly certain give you breakthrough for the specific character of your choosing, meaning you have access to all their techniques in whichever mode you're playing. But I never quite got all 7. My best advice here though is just constantly leave and re-enter the skill shop until they appear in recommended section. Works like a charm. So if you haven't figured it out, let's just recap. What makes this game so important to the franchise? While not perfect, the original Budokai developed a system that changed Dragon Ball games forever. Battle system, while drastically changed over the years and improved upon, still has deep roots in this game, at least for the next 10 years to come. The variety of modes available with post-game replayability surely began here as well. The game is just an overall blast to play, and the storytelling truly made me feel like a kid on a Wednesday night watching Toonami with my parents. If you're around my age and you played this game as a kid, give it a replay. You will not regret it. It really is a game that I'll never forget, and one that sparked my love for DBZ and DBZ games for an eternity. DragonBallZ Budokai 2 is not only the most underrated Budokai game, but perhaps the most underappreciated Dragon Ball Z game of all time. Not for the reasons that you might think. Released in the following year from its predecessor in 2003, this game received mixed reviews from critics and fans alike. Some even citing it as an underwhelming sequel, while others completely write off the game, due to its extreme and questionable changes from the previous entry. Due to this, it's considered the black sheep of the series, and even was taken off of the Budokai HD collection. This came as quite a shock to me, as I have nothing but awesome memories of playing this game as a kid, and I was even devastated when I realized I couldn't pick this up on the Budokai HD collection. So, that being the case, I replayed it to take an in-depth look at Budokai 2, also to uncover why people hated it, why it's a great game in retrospect, and discussing the ins and outs of the game as a whole. Now, I'm going to begin this review a bit different from the previous, as I want to start with the game's story, Dragon World. But you know, I couldn't do that without covering the main menu first. Budokai 2 follows a similar format of the previous, having 6 initial playable modes with a hidden unlockable 7th mode, which can be only accessed once you've completed the campaign. Now, I do have to point out the main menu screen is underwhelming for sure. Where the first Budokai shined with its awesome art for each mode, this one drops the ball completely. It just feels very basic and lazy. Once you select a mode, however, life flourishes to the game. What a better mode to start with than the infamous Dragon World. Upon the first level, you will quickly pick up on the vast changes they've made from Budokai 1. Goku, who will always be your main character, is the only one who will have a humanoid character design, while the rest will resemble board game pieces to fit the aesthetic here, which I don't really mind as much as I thought I would. First, you will be tasked with choosing an ally. Some stages allow you to choose one, while others will allow you 2. These allies can usually only be characters that you've previously unlocked, but they don't necessarily need to be a part of the arc that you're currently playing through. Right off the bat, you can use Buu Saga characters like Adult Gohan or Kid Trunks in the Saiyan arc. Now, this is because they don't aim to follow the canon like Budokai 1 did. The game only very loosely adapts the anime. For instance, not only can you choose characters that take no part in these fights, but in the first level, Raditz and Nappa will arrive searching for the Dragon Balls without Vegeta.
Alright!
What? The following level even introduces Frieza, who lands on Earth as opposed to Namek, in search of the Dragon Balls. And may I add, one of the best looking stages in the game. Damn, that background looks clean. Muscle Tower from the OG Dragon Ball? Dude, this is beautiful. But the third level, which is also Frieza but this time on Namek, as he should be, is where we finally get introduced to Vegeta as an enemy. Like, what? I understand Vegeta wasn't necessarily a hero in the Frieza arc, but still, introducing him here as a villain is just an interesting choice. Now, before we get any further, I do want to point out, while I understand this can be disappointing, I absolutely love this, especially in retrospective. At this time, it may not have been as repetitive as we know it to be now, but most of the games following this, at least until Xenoverse, simply adapt the Z story over and over and over again. They clearly wanted to go for something different here, and while many didn't like the attempt, I thought it was really cool. There's even some more drastic changes later on, like Frieza and Cell returning in the Buu arc as Majin versions of themselves. Although they're probably just there to give the player someone to fight, and otherwise it makes no logical sense. The addition was refreshing and gives a what-if story feeling to the game. Moving on, the map itself will provide the player with their own choices to make that will largely impact the fights, what you unlock, and can even alternate the route you take in this story. Each player on your team and the enemies will be granted one space to move in each turn. However, aside from just moving toward an enemy to fight them, you are given the choice to take your time, explore, and pick up some valuable perks along the way. These perks including swords, which will increase the player's attack power, and Saiyan armor, which will grant you a boost in defense, as well as capsules that, when obtained, will unlock a skill for you, ranging from support items all the way to a new super attack. Enemies can also come across these, resulting in not only you taking a huge L, but them benefiting. It is quite a cool addition to the game. I like the balance here, you know, the enemies can get some W's too. Most spots will also have hidden items underground, which you can dig for by opting to not move forward for that turn. Here you can find Zenny, which will be spent in a skill shop. Also Onions, which increase your movable distance from 1 to 2 spots. And even, of course, DragonBallZ, which can be found easily by locating the Dragon Radar in each level. Also, if you do manage to collect all 7 Dragon Balls, Shenron is summoned, and he'll grant you an actual wish of your choosing. Which, of course, there's limitations to, and I'm saving that for a little bit later in the video. But anyway, all of these extra perks are game changers, as they give you the option to alter your playthrough, and it also rewards exploration, as opposed to going through the same cutscenes a million times, to the point where even a massive fan like myself gets sick and tired of them. Sure, don't get me wrong, this isn't an open world exploration by any means, but maybe for its time, this isn't so bad. Goku, your allies, and the enemies will each have a certain number of lives, which are indicated in the bar next to your character, meaning if you beat an enemy, chances are, unless they're a Cyberman, you will have to fight them a few more times to secure the win. This is also relative to the heroes, and if you lose all your health as Goku, you will have to restart the entire level. Whereas if your ally dies, they will just disappear from the map. To avoid this happening, Dende spots will appear on each map, granting an extra life for the character who reaches it. This can also be used by enemies as well, which is quite discouraging in some situations. Damn, Dende, whose side are you on, man? Lastly, there are also areas that will negatively impact your fight. If you so happen to land on a key drop, health drop, or health half spot, you will, as expected, drop key or health at a significant rate, or for the latter, start with half of your health. This is particularly annoying when an enemy you have to beat is just parked there and won't move, no matter how much you bait them. This is far more complex than many other Budokai games. These changes force you to be strategic and creative with how you handle your battles, something many fighting games lack, aside from just Dragon Ball. Now, not only is the story different here, to the point of utter confusion for any Dragon Ball fan, but many of the game's mechanics are extremely altered here. For example, you know how you would typically gain Super Saiyan at the fight with Frieza, and Super Saiyan 3 at the Majin Buu fight, right? And not here, my friend. To unlock Super Saiyan, you will have to choose Krillin as your ally for Stage 3, the Namek portion, and have him purposely die at some point during it. Not only is the situation overly specific, but who the hell is going to choose Krillin over Gohan? Or almost anybody else? I mean, love you, Krill, but come on, dude, let's just be realistic here. Now, this is just one of the many instances here of secret unlockables, and there's way too many for me to list them all. But please take this into consideration. As opposed to other games where skills will be granted based on story progress, you need to use certain characters out of the many allies you'll be offered in a certain way in each level to unlock other characters, transformations, and super attacks. Meaning you could easily miss a lot of these and be stuck with base form characters with no ultimate attacks throughout your entire playthrough. It is actually possible. Now bear with me, please. To the naked eye, that sounds terrible. And in a way, it kind of is. I mean, who wants to be base form Goku against Kid Buu? Trust me, you don't. But at the same time, this incentivizes exploration, story mode replay, and also strategic ways to get through the story mode. Something that many other games are lacking, especially in the Budokai series. So overall, because I don't want to take too much time on just the map, but the thing that people tend to overlook here is that Budokai 2 doesn't follow a linear path like its predecessor. It allows you to customize your own route with your characters of choice. And of course, not everyone's going to agree with me, but I really did enjoy having to work to uncover these secrets that are built into Dragon World. It felt extremely rewarding when unlocking something new. And out of those many things you can unlock, some of my favorites are the super attacks. Now the combat in general feels very refined here, and it's definitely a step up from the original. Punches and kicks feel smoother. Now supers are also much easier to pull off, giving you the option to press 2 buttons, like forward circle, instead of a whole string of commands for the more basic moves like Kamehameha. This is also where the infamous burn your skin off the palm of your hand, attempting to charge up a super comes into play for the first time. I'm not sure if it's just me, but these were excruciatingly difficult to perfect. But regardless, very satisfying when they are. I do much prefer the melee supers, where you just need to press a different button than your opponent does to complete it. It's much less taxing. Just pick a button between circle, X, square, and triangle, and you have a 75% chance of it working to your advantage. If your opponent does get the best of you, however, you will still damage them, just without the finishing blow. A lot of characters' more basic supers, like continuous Kamehameha, similar to the previous entry, will be the exact same, just a different name to fit their character. The same reigns true for the melee supers as well. Unfortunate, but it never really bothered me that much where it affected my gameplay. Most of the ultimates do still require you to pull off lengthy combos for them to activate, but they do feel much more fluid here, if that makes sense, and also less of a hassle. And boy, are they beautiful. I might be crazy saying this, but I almost prefer this animation over the modern stuff. It just looks so freaking clean. Some of my personal favorites are Trunks' burning attack and the Big Bang attack from Vegeta. Just look how cool these are. Now, while the animation is great, it's never really showcased much, as the dialogue here is stripped to just text boxes with some mostly Goku interactions being voiced and minimally animated prior to fights. I feel like this is largely due to the fact that many of your allies will have no right to be in the arcs they're in, so they wouldn't have anything interesting to say to their opponent. Although sometimes they are characteristic of the person you're playing as, like in my second playthrough, Vegeta will say, "It's my fate to defeat Kakarot," to Raditz before battling him. Horrible impression, by the way, I know.
Shut up!
The only time we see what the animation is truly capable of is in the intro. Dragon Ball never fails to have some incredible openings. It has a hard rock riff with no vocals, which is fine in all honesty. It also showcases the characters that you should expect to see, but with a large focus on the Buu arc, including Super Saiyan 3, Goten, Trunks, and all the Majin forms. This is likely because the Buu arc was a new addition to the series at the time, and deserved the spotlight, rightfully so, as the story devotes 5 of the 9 levels to the Buu arc, deliberately flying through the other 70% of the story. This is mostly apparent in what I consider to be, debatably, the worst level in the game, Level 4. This isn't a bad stage by any means, but it is a lengthy one, and there's no way around that. Unlike Frieza, who gets 2 levels, and Buu, who gets a whopping 5, for some reason, they decided to cram the entire Android and Cell Sagas into 1 level. Why they could have just made 10 stages instead of 9 and divide these into 2, I have no idea. Not only is it lengthy, but it comes out of nowhere. Goku beats Frieza and he's like, "I smell a cell." And yeah, he just pops up right by Dr. Gero, like 2 seconds later.
I finally found you, Goku.
Also, Dr. Gero has Cyber Rangers? These, unlike other Cybermen, are unavoidable, meaning you have to defeat all of them for your allies to progress, before even touching Gero. They also, for some reason, excluded 19, in swap of Gero. An interesting choice. The game does have 29 characters as opposed to the previous Budokai's 24, but many like Zarbon and 19 are removed, so we technically do get more characters than it would just appear. Anyway, back to level 4. After beating Gero, 16, 17, and 18 just pop out of nowhere.
I am an android created to kill you. Goku, I am going to kill you.
We beat all of them, and then Cell comes out with the Cell Juniors, already in perfect form. Like, whoa dude, slow down. I can't process all of this at once. This, unfortunately, means that we lack the earlier transformations of Cell and Frieza. An interesting choice by the devs, but Buu was clearly the primary focus here. Again, I still enjoyed this stage, and I had half a mind to place Stage 7, the Hyperbolic Time Chamber, as the worst, because that entire stage is a maze, where Goku is confined to a corner for the entirety of it. But I love the backdrop, and Gotenks was so sick to play as. Next, in terms of best level, although I do love Stage 2, and pretty much every level in this game is awesome. We're nitpicking here. But overall, I'll have to give this to level 8. Now in Stage 8, you fight Super Buu with Gohan and Vegeta on your team. Seems normal, right? Well, instead of just having Gohan get absorbed, and then Goku and Vegeta becoming Vegito, you have to use Goku to reach Supreme Kai to grab the Potara, and then reach Vegeta to fuse into Vegito, all after you fight him with Gohan and get absorbed. This is probably the most accurate level to the actual story, as this is the general idea of how the events go down. However, on my first playthrough, I couldn't reach Vegeta in time for him to be decimated by Buu, as there is a huge difficulty spike around this time. So I had to take him on alone as Goku, and that's it. The game will not allow you to become Vegito if Vegeta dies. Although I had to wait a bit longer to play as my guy here, it allows for alternate endings to the level based on your actions and how well you plan things out. Freaking genius. At least this allowed my guy Tien to get a little shine. Lastly, the hardest stage is without a doubt the finale against Kid Buu. The difficulty spike here is abysmal. Kid Buu is an absolute monster. His health bar is enormous, and he barely even lets you hit him. He gains attack or defense boosts every few turns, and you have to find specific Popo carpets to even reach him in the first place. I forget Popo carpets. Popo carpets are as what you expect. Little carpets with Mr. Popo standing next to them. They will transport you to different areas on the map. Anyway, that's really just about it. They're pretty simple. Out of the many Popo carpets, try saying Popo carpets 3 times fast. Out of the many Popo carpets, there are 3 that will spawn you to Kid Buu's area, 2 of which are guarded by Frieza and Cell. At first you might think, well, I'll just take the easy one, right? Kid Buu is so difficult that likely your Goku and Vegeta won't be enough. You'll need to fight him, back out, and go to Dende spots to heal, which are conveniently placed, you guessed it, right by the dynamic duo themselves. Also, by Frieza, there's the Z Sword, where if you reached it, you get an attack boost for Goku and Gohan, incentivizing you to explore even further. When you do get to fight him, it's very difficult to pull off higher transformations, like Super Saiyan 3, because Buu is constantly up your ass. The key here is to use Vegeta, get his health down a bit, and then finish him off with Goku, because the villains will not regain health until you've beaten them fully. Even if Kid Buu is low on HP, this guy is still a damn menace. So take your time here and eventually you'll pull it off, I promise. Upon completing the story, assuming you have all the Dragon Balls, you will be granted 1 wish from Shenron. These can be either Breakthrough, which grants you all the attacks for a specific character, or Babidi's Spaceship, which is the 7th mode of the game. Babidi's Spaceship is the first one you should pick, because you'll need it to unlock other characters. And it was pretty fun. Nothing to write home about though. Basically, there's 4 stages requiring you to do something like beat up an enemy as many times as you can in a row, get as many hits on an enemy as possible, or deflect a Ki Blast as many times as you can in the time frame. Doing these will increase the energy that goes into reviving Buu. The more energy you acquire from the stage, the more likely you will be to unlock a new character, like all of the Buu forms and their attacks. Also Deborah, and even Absorption for Super Buu. Now, Absorption is so damn cool. Like, they should definitely bring this back. Buu absorbs a random fighter when this is pulled off, creating some really cool, unique moves for him. Although Cell absorbed Buu still gives me nightmares to this day. When unlocked, other characters can fuse as well, including Gotenks, Jito, and some what-if fusions like Goku and Tientia. These characters are typically OP and super fun to use in modes they're applicable for. If it's a Metamoran fusion, you will have to press the buttons displayed in a timely manner. If you do fail to do so, you will become the incorrect version of the fusion, even showing Piccolo giving you the stank face, like in the anime. You can't do any supers in this form, so you have to wait out the given time limit, which is pretty short. Or just give Sully hands like I did. Patara, however, has no time limit, but you need to choose a button and hope the comm doesn't choose the same one. If they do, however, they will break the Patara, and you will not be able to use it again for that entire fight. Now, as promised, I'm going to return to the mode selection to go over the rest of the modes that we haven't touched on yet, including, first off, Duel Mode. Now, Duel Mode is what you expect. You can play against a comm, a friend, or for some reason you can have 2 computers fight each other. Alrighty. What I really want to look at here though is the stage selection. This game offers some incredible stages that look so damn pristine. Personally, I love the snow stage that has the callback to Dragon Ball with Muscle Tower in the back, and the Red Ribbon Army base, which looks so awesome. These all have destructible environments, by the way, and the animations for these are amazing. My favorite one is the Red Ribbon Army Base. Just look how cool this is. You also get training mode where you can duel and practice your moves or partake in a tutorial of the game's mechanics as Goten. I could see these being really useful for a first time player, and I love how different characters teach him different moves. Next, options mode allows you to control the difficulty of the game and set duel time limits, as well as some other in-game options. The skill shop is where you can set skills to be used for your characters, or purchase skills from Bulma that can be used in any mode with the Zenny you earn from Dragon World. And of course, last but not least, my favorite mode of all time, World Tournaments. This mode is one that resonates with me heavily, as I used to always love playing this with my friends as a kid. As expected, there are 3 difficulties: Novice, Adept, and Advanced, but the latter 2 need to be unlocked by acquiring a certain amount of characters. To get Advanced, however, you will need to unlock every single character, which incentivizes a second playthrough or third of the game, as you will need to use characters you unlocked in the first run in earlier stages to acquire new characters. You can also play through this as many times as needed to collect the Dragon Balls, to get breakthroughs for all your characters, and unlock new skills. There's always something new to find, which is what I love about Dragon World. For instance, in Stage 1, you need to play as Vegeta, a character not unlocked until later, to acquire Nappa. And Stage 4, you need to beat Cell as Gohan to unlock the Great Saiyaman. Once you get everyone, you can play Advanced, and oh man, it's every bit as hard as the original. This time, there's an even bigger bracket, utilizing all of the game's characters. To win, you can either defeat an opponent by draining their HP, or by ring out, which you will need to strategically position yourself near the edge of the ring to do so. Also, you will receive a runner-up prize for second place in the Adept and Advanced difficulties. I've always loved tournament modes in Budokai games, and this one you can play with friends as well to see who comes out on top. What an absolute masterpiece. I truly hope Tenkaichi 4 doesn't let us down. But before we do wrap up, I want to briefly discuss what made this game so great, and also why it's the most underrated Budokai of all time. Everyone that hates on this game tend to overlook that it's meant to be different. The devs clearly didn't want to give you Budokai 1 Part 2. They wanted to allow you to make your own choices and your own routes in the game to create your own rewarding victory. The uniqueness of Budokai 2 is completely overshadowed to some people by just the board game layout of the story mode, that they completely miss all the great aspects of it that I brought up throughout this video. In short, while playing this as a kid, I loved it, and as an adult, honestly, I think I liked it even more. Looking in retrospect at all the games that came after this, at least until Xenoverse, they were the exact freaking same with better graphics and slightly different modes and very minimal changes. We got that in Xenoverse, but not much before. This is what we wanted the whole time, guys. I'm telling you, give it a replay, it is freaking awesome. But in short, the main things I love about Budokai 2 is the large amount of what-if scenarios that can be created, the strategy that is so unique to this game, and building your own route in certain levels. These are all things that brought me back to this game, and these are all things that will make me revisit it a few years down the road. DragonBallZ Budokai 3 is not only undoubtedly the most highly praised Budokai game, but perhaps one of the best DragonBallZ games of all time. And not for the reasons that you might think. Releasing the following year from the controversial Budokai 2 in 2004, this game received much higher reviews than its predecessor and is often praised for the amount it did to improve upon it, beyond just graphics and presentation. Because of this, Budokai 3 often makes it into the top 5 or even top 3 rankings of best DBZ games of all time. I, as well, would agree with this statement. Having not played the Budokai series since the late 2000s, and always considering this to be a notch above the rest. But having recently played both of the previous entries, I came here with a clear mind and goal to take an in-depth look at why so many people love this game, how it improved upon the groundwork laid out in the earlier titles, if it truly holds up as one of the best games that Dragon Ball has to offer, also discussing the ins and outs of the game as a whole. Now, while I would love to just jump right into the campaign, I do have to quickly point out just a few aspects of the game that really stuck out to me. In terms of design, the menu does a great job at grabbing your attention. It features a majority of the cast, which are all squeezed into one tiny vehicle, a sight to see on its own, with Goku narrating a brief description of each of the playable modes.
Master your skills so no one can beat you.
It does continue the tradition of the previous entries, having 6 initial playable modes with a secret 7th mode that's only unlockable upon completion of the campaign. What does not follow that same format, however, is the story mode, Dragon Universe. The story will start off at the fight with Raditz.
What?
Or wait, does it actually? That depends. Upon entering Dragon Universe, you will immediately notice the major changes they've made here. While Budokai 2 tried to switch things up with its board game layout that allows you to incorporate side characters of your choice, 3 takes that even further beyond and creates 11 distinct story modes, each of them tailored to one specific character. You will also find that most of the other characters, which gives a grand total of 38, at the exclusion of fusions, can be obtained by completing specific battles with certain characters, although many will be only unlockable through exploration and very specific routes in a second playthrough, like Broly or Omega Shenron for instance. This is awesome, because you get to experience the Z story through each character's unique perspective, something that at least in many cases, aside from maybe Supersonic Warriors, we don't have the opportunity to do. The problem with this though is that the stories will only focus on the major battles of each character respectively. So that being said, some characters will have shorter and sometimes drastically short storylines, given they don't play as significant of a role in the story or maybe become irrelevant due to some major power scaling issues that DBZ is notorious for. Now, while I do want to discuss each of these stories in detail, for me to do that, I need to first discuss some of the massive upgrades. And to start, Budokai 3 adds a flight mechanic. No, not just mid-battle. Off the bat, they give you the ability to fly freely around a brand new map, where you can choose to either explore various landscapes or simply just go to your next mission, which will always be located by a little red dot on the minimap. If you do choose to take your time progressing and explore a bit, you will unlock various items, ranging from new supers to support items, which can help you in different ways during battle. While this is not entirely necessary, because you will get many of your character's supers and transformations from simply progressing through the story, also unlocking them at more appropriate times as opposed to Budokai 2, there is still a plethora of other skills that will make it well worth your while, including supers that may only be relevant to characters who don't have their own story. Now, while on the topic of capsules, membership cards are a new addition to the game that can be located in a very similar way. These cards will have different tiers, ranging from green to the highest tier, black. These allow you to purchase higher tier capsules from the skill shop that you may not have found while exploring. But before you even ponder about purchasing these skills outside of your character's playthrough, Zenny must be obtained, which can also be located at random spots on the map. Moving on though, what would a Dragon Ball game be without the ability to collect Dragon Balls? In regard to these, there will always be 7 in every story, but only a set number are obtainable in each portion. So, to make this brief, if you finish an arc without finding them all, well, you are just out of luck. Time for a 3rd playthrough, or a 4th. However, as difficult as this may sound, given the size of the map, these can be found pretty easily by first locating the Dragon Radar, which is in different locations in every story. But if 7 are collected upon the completion of the story, you'll be granted 1 wish from Shenron, with a bit more variety than the previous game. All in all, I had a great time collecting these, and upon entering each new arc, I always made sure this was the first thing I did. Doing this led me to find many new capsules that I may not have come across otherwise. In certain situations while exploring, you will come across an unmarked location, either showing as 3 question marks, or sometimes it will be named like West City or Central City. These will oftentimes lead you to simply additional dialogue. There will always be some dialogue before a battle, but it's decent at best. There isn't any cutscenes, and in a way, it's even downgraded from Budokai 2, because their mouths don't even move. I will say though, if you do choose to search for these, some will not just explore more of the story, but also enhance it and add a bit of flair. introducing some really cool what-if scenarios, like Vegeta landing at the Kame house in the Saiyan Saga, and doing a bit of flirting with Bulma, or Yamcha and Bulma breaking up. Coincidence? I doubt it. I can understand how some people would want proper cutscenes in the game, especially since we were lacking those again in Budokai 2, but personally, I know the story like the back of my freaking hand, so unless they're adding something vastly different to it, like Xenoverse for instance, I don't really care that much, although still, having the Buu Saga cutscenes would probably been a nice touch. There are mini battles called battle points, which you can find by exploring or by simply holding R1 to sense for an enemy's key. These are usually mini bosses, but can also sometimes be a more interesting battle, like Metal Cooler in the Cell Saga, or Teen Gohan. Upon beating these and other major battles in the story, you will acquire experience points, which can be used to level up each respective character. Each subsequent level will become increasingly harder to reach, requiring more experience points as you progress. But they reward you with 1 skill point per each increase in level. Now you could use these skill points to increase distinct stats, like health, ki, attack, guard, arts, ability, and calm. Upon research, I believe it increases the overall power of your character if you're fighting them as a calm in duel mode. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but regardless, I found it to be basically useless. Personally, I attributed most of my points to health and attack, then dispersed the rest of them more evenly across my less utilized stats. To sum up the level system here, I truly enjoyed it implemented in this game. Although Kakarot undoubtedly expanded upon this in so many ways, don't get me wrong, there is still something really charming about the simplicity, and especially for its time, this was so cool. Another thing you will notice on your first playthrough is the changes to the combat. The combat system has leveled up so much, to the point where I was genuinely shocked at the improvements from Budokai 2. And I mean, yeah, for the most part, this still holds up today. You can now teleport by holding guard in the direction of your opponent as they're about to land a hit, or by knocking back your opponent and performing a teleport chain, which looks so badass. I couldn't get enough of it. Not only that, but you can also counter teleport when an enemy teleports, and then teleport on top of that. Yeah, it gets crazy at times, but trust me, these are so much fun to pull off. Now, aside from teleporting, you're also granted the ability to dodge, instead of just blocking or sidestepping, by tapping guard as a hit is about to land. And honestly, this looks and feels so smooth. I was genuinely really impressed here. In addition, beam struggles are also introduced here, and can be activated if 2 supers are triggered at the same time. Now, I'm usually not a huge fan of spinning the joystick until my palms bleed, but damn, these feel so much smoother than Budokai 2. Just make sure not to do it too close to the opponent. Aside from beam struggles, super attacks are very similar to the previous entry, where you can decide to either deliver them at the end of a lengthy combo, or just hit forward or backward circle. Although, word of advice, you do need to time these fairly well because the comm will sidestep you frustratingly often. But in contrast, the ultimates get a major overhaul here. Beyond us are the days of maneuvering lengthy combos like forward square, triangle, triangle, forward square, circle. In place of that, we get arguably the most impactful change to the combat system, as well as unarguably the most controversial for its time. Hyper Mode and Dragon Rush. Hyper Mode is a temporary transformation that makes it so you perform special attacks. While in Hyper Mode, your ki will drastically deplete, but also freeze at wherever you entered it. Meaning that if you have 1 ki bar left, you can use a 5 ki bar attack, but you better be fast. This is why I recommend having max ki before using this mode, because you will miss some specials. Now, if the enemy is knocked back while in hyper mode, it will activate Dragon Rush, but the duration of this will be left up to chance. After the first combo, you'll be prompted to choose one of the 4 shape buttons, and hope your opponent doesn't choose the same. If they do, however, your Dragon Rush will end prematurely. You will do this up to 3 times, each subsequent time losing the previous button you chose as an option, ultimately turning it from a 75% chance to only a 50-50 shot of it going in your favor. But if you are lucky enough to experience the entirety of Dragon Rush, you will finish with a devastating blow. On occasion, this will even grant you access to a character's ultimate, like Goku's Warp Kamehameha, or Vegeta's Final Flash. Now, I say this is the most impactful change to the combat because, well, it changes the entire dynamic of the fight. But, and this is a really thick but, after playing for hours on end, especially if you're playing for 100%, this Dragon Rush gets very, very repetitive, annoying, and tedious. It also doesn't help that everyone's Dragon Rush is nearly exactly the same. In the end, I found myself going, ugh, not again, when I accidentally pulled one of these off instead of an ultimate, which will happen more often than you think. Now, ultimates, on the other hand, are absolutely beautiful and much more rewarding in my opinion. Not only have the graphics improved on the previous game, but the method of getting an attack win is much less taxing. Instead of peeling off the skin of your palms by spinning the joystick, you are required to hit the X button when the meter is full, or at least as close to it as you can get, a total of 3 times. The person with the bar that's most full at the end will win, and assuming that's you, you will be rewarded with higher damage, and in many cases, an awesome destruction sequence, culminating in the entirety of the stage becoming the destroyed version of it, granting you a brand new landscape. Now, I really do love these destroyed landscapes because the sequences are so cool to see, and I also much prefer the new method of filling the meter over the joystick version. Some of my favorite are Goku's Spirit Bomb when in Super Saiyan, transitioning it to Super Dragon Fist, or my boy Trunks' Burning Slash, which is so damn clean. Now that we discussed at least the majority of the gameplay, let's start to dive into the story modes. Now, I don't want to take too much time on this part because I don't typically cover the story details, especially for DBZ, as it's the same story over and over again, but there are a significant amount of changes here in Budokai 3, so my strategy is as follows. I'll be deciding the best and worst stories the game has to offer, while explaining my reasoning for such. The other 9 I will touch on briefly, just for the sake of the length here. Anyway, that being said, coming in at my choice for the best campaign is, of course, Son Goku. Now that's probably a very obvious choice for some of you, but it was actually a bit more difficult than you might think, as second place has a very similar story, and I even like some of their combat better. But in the end, Goku's story is by far the most complex. Not only is it the longest, but you can also acquire well over a third of the game's roster just through this campaign alone. That's not even including the fusions and transformations that are unlocked here. Through Goku's playthrough, especially if it's your first, you will uncover many of the game's secrets and unlockables. And there is a lot here, spanning from Raditz through Kid Buu. But while that story is lengthy and great in itself, the second playthrough is what really did it for me. Many of these characters will have some sort of secret path on their second playthrough you can take that branch off from the main story and bring you to the what if or even movie/GT realm, adding a lot more variety and tons of replayability. Needless to say, Goku's is no exception. Not only will you have the ability to unlock an alternate ending by defeating Kid Buu with the Spirit Bomb, unlocking Oob, but upon a second playthrough, you can also unlock hidden characters like Bardock and even Kid Goku by traveling to Gohan's house after Raditz, but before Nappa. And if you know how Dragon Ball's story works, that's a very short period of time. You can also choose to fight Cooler and even Super Saiyan Vegeta in place of Frieza on the Namek arc, or even Broly and Omega Shenron, by completely bypassing the Kid Buu fight and taking an alternate route at the end of the story. But trust me, there are extremely specific measures you have to take to unlock this, and it is rather confusing at times. You will first have to stumble upon Hercule in the desert section at a very specific point in the story, only to continue to the Buu saga, fighting Buu with Vegito, who is absolutely incredible in this game, plays so smooth. I mean, look at those damn high kicks. Later, fighting Buu inside Buu, which is a freaking awesome stage, might I add. And then later finding out I unlocked a brand new route in the story. Now, if you do choose to take this route, this is where you'll come across some of the hardest battles that the game has to offer. And that being said, while Broly is an absolute god, and Kid Buu is still a straight freaking menace, Omega Shenron is definitely, without a doubt, the hardest battle that I personally had in Budokai 3. To begin, his health is in an entirely new range from what I had seen at the time, and his attacks will absolutely decimate you. Though Broly is of similar strength, and you even get the privilege of starting off with Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta here, the timer on this fusion is insanely low, like 15 seconds low, and Hyper Mode will deplete this even more rapidly. That being said, it is almost imperative that you hit him with a full power 100 times Big Bang Kamehameha to win. And even still, you will immediately regress to base form after this, having next to no supers in your arsenal, aside from Super Saiyan 4, which will be extremely hard to attain due to Omega never giving you a minute to charge up. Strategy is absolute key here for victory, and if you hope to unlock the ultimate bad guy. To sum this up, I absolutely love when games throw us a curveball like this, giving us what-if stories that make us discover new secrets and unlock new routes for our character to take, whatever they may be. And that is why Goku's is the most impactful and best story in the game for me. Now, while I do want to only mention the best and worst in the game, I do feel a necessity to briefly touch on the second best story in the game, as it is very similar. The Saiyan Prince Vegeta. First off, I haven't touched on this yet, but the soundtrack in Vegeta's story is absolutely so hype. It just fits his character so damn well. Otherwise, Vegeta's story is very much the same as Goku's, just with a few less unlockables here, and by a few I mean maybe like 10 less characters. But there are very similar side routes. For instance, you still get to fight Cooler and Broly. You just probably already unlocked them in Goku's story, and I'm not even entirely sure you can unlock them in Vegeta's story in the first place. Regardless, most characters, even those who don't have specific reasons for second story playthroughs, will still have some secrets to them, like Kid Gohan, where you can choose to fight Goku as a first battle in place of Piccolo, which unlocks Grandpa Gohan's house. One of my absolute favorite stages in the game. I said it once, I'll say it again, Grandpa Gohan's house is awesome. Or others like Krillin will have you play through the entirety of his story twice, but the second time around will grant you access to the Cell Saga, where otherwise, for some reason, his story will end at the Namek arc. Now real quick, I know Krillin kind of peaked in the Namek arc, but we gave Yamcha, freaking Yamcha, a Buu arc fight. Yamcha! I mean, remember when Krillin tried to stand up to Buu at the Lookout? This game was already reaching enough giving Oob a damn story mode. We couldn't just give Krillin that fight to top it off. I mean, come on, that sounds pretty reasonable. Or for characters like Piccolo, you can unlock Hercule by triggering a secret cutscene and then flying to West City directly after. Although it is worth mentioning, characters like Yamcha and Tien will have very straightforward and quick stories, due to them not having any major battles past the Saiyan arc. And Broly's, while a cool and fun addition, being entirely too easy, as you could simply demolish most of your opponents. At least that's pretty accurate. Now, if you haven't already guessed, the worst story is none other than Oob. There's nothing wrong with Oob as a character. I quite like him actually, but the story is just so underwhelming. While you can find a lot of Majin Buu's supers here, if you're into that character, all you do is fight Goku, Majin Buu, and then Goku again. He also doesn't have many attacks, and given that he's introduced in the very last episodes of the series, it seems nearly pointless to include him in this. It would have made a lot more sense if they included characters like Baby in the game to fight Maju. But that being said, I do appreciate them giving him some screen time and letting you play as a character that is otherwise not shown much outside of GT. Upon completion of a story, however, assuming you have simultaneously collected all 7 Dragon Balls, then Shenron will be summoned, granting you 1 wish out of 3. I will say I do like these options better than the previous game. Firstly, they are tailored to a specific character, so you'll get all 11 breakthroughs if playing through the stories. In fact, breakthroughs are the only ones here really worth getting, as they give you the ability to use every super the character has. And especially considering how important second playthroughs here are, I kind of abuse this. The other 2 options will typically be a skill or memories of the character, which, if I haven't explained yet, are the entire collection of character dialogue that reenact a scene or battle from the anime. I personally don't care for it, but I typically got them upon finishing a second playthrough, just to say I did. After doing this 10 or 11 times, or 30 if you're grinding like I was, you will unlock the 7th mode in the game, Dragon Arena, which, if you haven't guessed, can only be unlocked by completing every character's story, aside from Dragon Arena, which will be narrated by Commander Red, a really cool touch. allows you to fight the entire roster with any character of your choice, and the enemies can be at whatever level you choose. But they won't all be available from the start. The more you level up, the stronger the enemies you fight will be. Now this is definitely the most efficient way to upgrade your character stats, especially your favorites who aren't playable in Dragon Universe. And you can even upgrade your Dragon Universe character much faster here as well. But perhaps the most important aspect of this mode is its plethora of unlockables, which are only obtainable through new additions to the franchise, called break-in events. Break-in events are randomly triggered when choosing a character to fight, meaning it can happen every second fight, or it can happen every 10th fight, obstructing the original opponent for a brand new one. Think Super Smash Bros. System for unlocking new characters. The only difference is every 5 levels or so will be a different skill. Let me explain. While highly limited, as you can only unlock Cyberman and Cell Jr. by completing one of these, specifically while fighting an opponent between levels 31 and 35, and 66 and 70 respectively, I actually quite like this format, and would love to see it return to a newer Dragon Ball game. That being said, I would have liked if they had more characters available for unlock here, aside from just these 2 bozos, but if you're 100%ing it, it's a must. And you also can unlock other important skills like We Got a Power or Sparking, which actually increases your World Tournament prize money. Speaking of World Tournament, you can also unlock the Cell Games Tournament here, by beating Cell in a level 51 through 55 break-in. It's hard to reminisce on any Dragon Ball Z retro game without bringing up World Tournament, one of the best modes that Dragon Ball has ever brought to us, and this game is no exception, even allowing you to invite up to 8 of your friends to play, which was so fun back in the day. There will be 3 main difficulties, but only Novice is available from the start. To unlock the later 2, you must unlock a certain number of characters to fill the tournament, of course. Then beat the prior tournament difficulty, which will allow you to purchase it in the skill shop. You can also beat enemies by draining their HP as usual, or by ring out, by strategically positioning yourself near the edge of the ring, and timing your attacks well. Also, some of these matchups will even make for some really interesting what-if interactions.
Such a resemblance.
Upon winning Advanced, you will be granted the highest portion of prize money, and given the opportunity to fight in the Cell Games, assuming you unlocked it. Now the Cell Games is just like any other tournament, except there's no rules. So you can use, well, fusions. Fusions return again from Budokai 2, consisting of the same timed events the previous game did for Batara and Metamoran respectively. Although there are no what-if fusions, which is a real bummer. We do get some newly added fusions to the mix, like Super Saiyan 2 and Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta, which have some awesome finishers. It is worth noting Absorption also returns here, which will transform Super Buu and grant them some attacks. I do like the previous game's version much better though, as I think there is more characters to absorb, although maybe I just got the same ones over and over again. Bad RNG. Now, when talking about all the modes, we cannot of course forget about dueling, which allows you to fight against a comm, a friend, or again, watch 2 bots duke it out. Yikes. What I really want to talk about here is the stage selection, which, although missing Muscle Tower, do make a huge upgrade. It's difficult for me not to marvel over how beautiful some of these are, and I simply just love the art style. I kept changing my mind on which were my favorite, because I genuinely love all of them for different reasons. But my top 2, at least at this time, are Grandpa Gohan's house and Inside Buu. Grandpa Gohan's house brings me back so much nostalgic vibes and gives you that OG Dragon Ball feel. Fully equipped with Gohan's house, that classic terrain, and even a giant fish like Kid Goku caught in the first episode. Not to mention an awesome destructive environment sequence. Now the Inside Buu stage was so sick. They definitely did not need to add this here, but they did anyway, and I love them for it. It's just so unique, and I really like the feeling of being inside. You can also change the strength and difficulty of your duel opponents in option mode, where you can also change the settings, duel time, adjust the screen and sound, as well as manually save if you want to do that for some reason. The skill shop is where you go to spend Zenny you've collected through World Tournament or through Dragon Universe. You can also, interestingly enough, trade skills with a second player. Upon entering the skill shop, you will notice it is hosted by Launch this time, who will change from her good to her bad side at random. Also, this leads to some hilarious dialogue.
Don't be such a tightwad. Buy some more now.
You can find new supers, ultimates, skills, and items to help you during battle. And you can also edit them here to have them equipped to your character of choosing. Lastly, practice mode is similar to the previous game, as you will have two options: practice and training. Training, which is broken up into chapters, will teach you the basics and eventually some more advanced techniques as well. These will mostly follow Gohan as he ages, but will also include a few other characters in later tutorials. I do definitely recommend doing some of these, as the new combat can be tricky to get acquainted with at first. Also, if you finish all the chapters here, you'll be granted a skill called Bibbidi's Pot. Always knew that guy was smoking something. But before we wrap up here, let's briefly discuss why this game was so good, ahead of its time even, how it improved upon the groundwork laid out in earlier titles, if it still holds up as one of the best games that Dragon Ball has to offer, and if I personally enjoyed it. Well, let me just start by saying Budokai 3 absolutely blew my expectations out the water. I truly did not expect to be so captivated by this game and love it as much as I did. Even after completion of it, knowing I had to start the video, I did not want this game to be over. What made this game so good for me, personally, and I'm sure this holds true for a lot of you as well, is the explorability, giving you that taste of what flying around the world as a Z-Warrior actually feels like, the drastically improved combat system, aside from Dragon Rush, of course, and the plethora of secrets that you can uncover, giving you more freedom than any DBZ game that came before it. In short, this game took what Budokai 1 did best and what Budokai 2 did best and combined them, giving you a near perfect Dragon Ball Z experience. The only things I have to criticize are Dragon Rush, which is really frustrating and repetitive at times, and also the fact the stories skip around so much, giving you no idea what's happening if you're new to the series. But that being said, the game is not perfect. Not many things are, but it is pretty damn close and a great attempt at a Dragon Ball Z game in 2004. And I loved it. I absolutely love this game. I'm going to play it again in probably 2 years or so.
Dragon Ball Z Sagas is a game that has been commonly referred to as the worst Dragon Ball Z game of all time. It's derived an extremely negative reputation throughout gamers and Dragon Ball Z fans alike. But is it really as bad as people say that it is? Actually no. Literally every review I've watched of the game is absolutely ripping it apart, calling it names like the worst Dragon Ball Z game ever. But the thing is, I remember loving this game as a kid. I couldn't possibly be alone here, right? Although the comments in the other reviews of this game are mostly negative, I did notice in almost every single one there would be at least a few comments disputing the hate, having fond memories of Sagas just like I do. Granted, I was just a little boy when this game came out in 2005, so I guess the question is, will I still like it today? And is it worthy of the title, worst DBZ game ever? Let's find out. The main menu screen of this game is downright terrible. Not only is it bland, but the modes. Seriously, there aren't any. Aside from story mode, of course. Now, not every game needs to be filled with excessive amounts of modes for it to be good, but this game came out in a time where we were getting like 3 DBZ games a year. For you youngins, that's not an exaggeration. Plus, Sagas came out, I believe, the same year as Budokai Tenkaichi, which was packed with content. So it definitely feels very lackluster in comparison. I mean, let's check out these modes anyway. You've got training mode,
Collect Z coins to purchase skill upgrades.
Fun. Then you've got extras, which is literally just the cutscenes from the game, which are, spoiler alert, just cuts from the anime. I'm pretty sure this is the only DBZ game that does this, and I see why. I usually look forward to seeing cutscenes in the upcoming DBZ games. They have different takes on events, new dialogue, sometimes, enhanced graphics, and in recent years, arguably superior graphics to the anime. But this is legit just ripped from the show. Reeks of laziness. The most important mode here is, of course, story mode. Similar to the original Budokai and Burst Limit, the story starts off at the fight with Raditz, and it ends with the Cell Games saga.
Trunks!
But with a twist. The game is broken up into 7 sagas, like different chapters in the game. You've got Saiyan, Ginyu, Frieza, my 2 favorite, Yardrat and Trunks, and then androids and Cell. This game is a classic beat 'em up, so it throws in the aspect of open world. Spoiler again, it's not open world. With collectibles, enemy types, and more. And it also adds story aspects no game up to this point has covered, like the Yardrat and Trunks saga, which is actually pretty damn cool. Once I started playing the game, I realized quickly why I loved this as a kid, and also why it got so much hate from older fans at the time.
You can only carry 3 Senzu beans at a time. You can only carry 3 Senzu beans at a time. You can only carry 3 Senzu beans at a time.
You're basically just running around a linear area and beating up enemies who in many cases have no right to be there, given their place in the story's timeline. The game wants you to destroy everything in your sight because that's cool and fun and new at the time. But what's not fun is finding all the collectibles, which for the most part are underneath the destructible parts of the environment. But the collectibles are almost always not required to beat the game, but will allow you to grow as a character. There's 3 different ways this is possible. First, through red capsules. If you collect enough of these, your health bar will increase. Also, each one you collect will recover you a bit if you've taken some damage. Next, we have yellow capsules. If you collect enough of these, your ki meter will increase, allowing you to do more blasts, teleports, and anything that takes ki. In addition, each one collected gives you a bit of your ki back. I find that aspect of these to be almost useless, given that you can just charge your ki at any moment pretty quickly. And finally, arguably most importantly, Z coins. These coins are scattered across almost every level, and if enough are collected, you can purchase a special move, combo, and other things that will generally improve your Saga's experience. You can also find Senzu beans in many of the levels, which allow you to regain all your health if you happen to die. And I'm not gonna lie, these can be pretty useful for some of the harder levels. Now, let's get into the actual gameplay. As early as the first level, you'll notice that aiming is extremely off. It's not only hitting enemies that's weird, but gathering collectibles can be an absolute mess. Sometimes you will run around a capsule in circles for like 10 seconds before you actually grab it. And trust me, this is the game's fault. You are not an idiot. The solution here, at least for enemies, is locking onto them, which will work more often than if you don't lock on at least. Another minor gripe I had is that the enemies are always where they shouldn't be at. Like Cybermen in the Raditz level, these weird ass androids in the Future Trunks arc. Okay, it's been a while since I've watched the history of Trunks, but I'm pretty sure there was only 2 androids. And get this, Cybermen in the freaking Cell Saga. At that point, they should have just used Cell Juniors, even though that wouldn't have really made sense either. The only ones that genuinely fit where they're supposed to is the Frieza soldiers. I do understand why they do this though. This type of game does need a plethora of smaller beat-em-up enemies to fill in the gaps between boss fights. So honestly, it's excusable. Sagas is also far from the open world experience it was marketed as. You will have to kill the same enemies over and over again until, oh wait, a bigger version of the same enemy appears. I don't remember giant blue Cybermen in the anime. And if you do attempt to skip through a group of enemies, you'll hit an invisible wall and be greeted with a warm welcome from Bulma. I can't tell you how many times I had to hear that.
You must kill all enemies before proceeding.
There's also a part in the first level where you have to buy the Kamehameha to continue. That's right, Goku's signature move that he learned 10 plus years prior to these events needs to be purchased in order to continue on with the story. I literally had to go back, collect Z-Coins to progress in the story within the first 2 minutes of the game.
Complete. You now have enough Z-coins to purchase
At least it was in the first level.
the upgrade point and purchase the special move skill.
If you're a completionist like me, you're going to be going back a lot in this game. And I mean a lot. For instance, and one of many instances in the game, in the second level, you have to go through the entire map to get to the mountain where you have to gain enough height to collect the majority of the Z-Coins. Meaning, you have to fly back across literally the entire level and then fly back again through the entire level to fight Nappa. Hopefully that makes sense. But basically, you get to the end of the level, then you jump as high as you can from the top of the cliff to fly back across to the start of the level again to get all these Z-Coins that were at the top of the map. Then you have to fly back all the way through again to the end of the level to fight the boss. I don't understand why they couldn't just allow us to fly upwards. I mean, this is Dragon Ball, after all. Needless to say, the platforming is just odd, but it does keep me captivated, and it does add a bit, and I mean just a tiny bit of longevity to the game. This may just be a personal thing, and judging by comments I've seen in other videos, it is. But I somewhat enjoyed the tedious little things like finding a cliff you have to jump off to collect the highest floating Z-Coin, and searching for the capsules, because look, this game is short, and I mean really short. If it was a 30-hour game, I would hate this with a passion. But if you're not collecting everything, there's no reason to take your time. So it does add a tiny bit of depth to the game. For example, I finished this game in 4 hours, with everything collected. All the capsules, all the Z-Coins. If you are not doing that and just breezing through it, I can see a casual gamer completing this in 2 hours or less. If they didn't cut out so many key parts of the story, it might have been a decent runtime though. This would have been a perfect game to incorporate a Snake Way level with a Princess Snake boss fight. But no, straight from Rats to Nappa. But that's just light. Even worse, the game goes straight from Vegeta to the Ginyu Force fight. In that very same level, you play as Vegeta. So why we couldn't have had a Zarbon and Dodoria level? So much content was skipped for seemingly no reason. Oh, and switching topics, I have to mention, the Vegeta fight at the end of the Saiyan Saga is just weird. I remember this from being a kid and I always hated it with a passion. Vegeta is just teleporting around everywhere constantly and spams the same 2 attacks the entire time, like to a point where you just get so frustrated with this game. There is barely any melee from him, and when he does, he just slings you in the air. It gets very annoying. Luckily, I purchased Teleport right before this fight, which makes this and other battles so much more easy to handle and a bit more fun as well. The weird thing about Teleport though is the game advertises it on the control menu and also has a specific button designated for it. So having to buy it mid-game is a bit of a weird choice. Another thing is the power levels. This is one of possibly the only game that has the power levels of each of the bosses show before fighting them. Well, kinda. I thought this was a really neat addition to the game, but it is kind of weird that they just stop around a Frieza fight. I mean, at that point, it's like, why even have them at all if 70% or so of the game just has question marks in place of the power levels? Now, they will show you a certain amount of question marks depending on how strong this person is. Like, for instance, Android 17 will have in the 10 millions question marks, but Perfect Cell will have in the 100 millions of question marks. But still, it's just an odd choice. The combos you get from the Z Shop are okay. They're mostly just AA, BB, AA, or some combination of the 2 buttons. There literally is not much to it. A lot of the time, I'd find myself accidentally hitting them when fighting. Other times, it would be on purpose, but again, they are not hard to remember. And once you have all of them, some combination of the 2 buttons is almost certain to be a combo. Personally though, I found myself using uppercut smash the most. It feels like very Dragon Ball when you pull it off. So, as you could probably tell, I'm not going to break down every level and boss in this game. Only ones that really stood out. That being said, the video is getting a little bit long, so let's jump into the most annoying boss fight in the game. Burter and Jace. I'll give it to the game, the 2v1 boss fight was a pretty cool idea. But dude, Burter just constantly interrupts you when you're fighting Jace and vice versa. Like constant spam of this same rush attack. It's not a hard fight, just super frustrating to get through. Oh, and on the other hand, one of my absolute favorites was the Yardrat boss fight. Now, not for what you'd expect. The boss fight is, for lack of a better term, mid. But although the entire saga consists of 0 levels and just this one boss fight, I do have to commend the game for adding this in there. I'll be the first to admit, it's a bit out of left field, like what the hell is this thing? And the boss fight's just okay. I mean, it doesn't even look like a Yardrat, and I just don't get where the inspiration came from, but no other game has ever incorporated this piece of the story, where Goku goes to Yardrat. So kudos for that. I really appreciate it in the game. But this does bring up, again, a serious question. If they're adding a freaking Yardrat saga, why again did they skip so many crucial fights that were legitimately in the anime? No Dodoria? No Zarbon? No Guldo? No Mecha Frieza? Ultra Trunks versus Cell? I mean, hell, they could have added a Garlic Jr. saga. I mean, come on, let's be honest. That would have been kind of unique and cool. But no, they went with Goku on Yardrat, which is briefly mentioned in the anime to have happened. I just really wish I could see what they were thinking here when making the game. But again, this stuff is different and I appreciate it. Another arc that makes this game stand out is the Trunks saga. At this point, it was pretty rare to see games go into the future Trunks timeline, and the way they did it was a really nice touch. I mean, of course they added hundreds of these Star Wars looking androids to battle before you reach 17 and 18, but still, for this game, pretty damn different, unique, and dare I say cool. I also remember when I was a kid, there was this glitch when fighting 17 and 18. You can go underneath the map, but I don't know how I did it, and it didn't happen this time. But trust me, it's possible. Just look it up on YouTube. Another thing I will give the Trunks saga props for is the prototype androids are more tolerable than the androids in the next saga. Beating this level while preventing them from destroying the city is tedious and frustrating. Sometimes they will be completely off screen and attacking buildings. I can only do so much at one time. There's so much more I have in my notes, but this video is already significantly longer than I expected. So let's just briefly touch on the Cell saga and wrap it up. Although there's 5 levels in this finale saga, there's really only 3, and you could even argue there's only 1. It goes by quick. 2 of these levels are hyperbolic time chamber levels, one with Trunks and Vegeta, and the later one featuring Goku and Gohan. I have a few problems with this. Why skip over so much content from the show again, and then fit in 2 entire levels of hyperbolic time chamber training? I just do not understand. Also, these levels are actually much harder than you'd imagine. If you're playing solo, all you have to do is complete combos in your training partner faster than they do on you. Sounds simple, right? No. Your partner will, for some reason, be insanely fast and hard to hit. As soon as the next combo appears, they launch at you ready to go. Teleport definitely is your friend here if you're playing one player. But most importantly, these levels give off tutorial vibes. There's literally only 2 levels after this. Why are we learning combos at the very end of the game? Again, could have been useful on King Kai's planet in the Saiyan saga, or with Gohan and Piccolo early on. Why now? It's like the game forgot to teach you combos until this point. Like I stated previously, there's only one non-boss fight exclusive level in this saga, and it's Vegeta versus Semi-Perfect and Perfect Cell. This is an okay level. You chase Cell through the island, fighting him a few times before he absorbs 18, and then you take him on again when he's perfect. Problem here is they skip over Ultra Trunks, which I think would have been a cool standalone level. It wouldn't have been that hard to make, I don't think. I just don't get why they skipped it. Speaking of crucial moments, the Cell games completely skips over the Goku versus Cell fight. Like, what? The Goku versus Cell fight. The game concludes with Super Saiyan 2 Gohan versus Cell. Playing as Super Saiyan 2, finally. So cool. You power through Cell and end the game, right? Wrong again. For difficulty purposes, the game makes you fight Cell in base and SS1 form in order to charge up SS2. Even bigger issue. The key meter, or the power-up meter, is constantly depleting at such a fast pace. The strat here is to constantly teleport, combo Cell, rinse and repeat, and you cannot let him move away. You just have to keep beating this guy up. You do not have any time to back off and take a break, because the key meter will drain so rapidly. We just beat the hell out of this guy. I don't know. It took me a few times to beat it. But once you hit Super Saiyan 2, you will completely dominate Cell, which is pretty fun. There's also this weird moment at the end of the fight where it will flip to cutscene and then put you right back in the fight where you left off, only to have you hit cell with one Kamehameha and it's over. Like 2 seconds of extra gameplay. They should have just made the entire thing a cutscene. I don't get what they were getting at here. So we've talked a bunch about the bad aspects of the game, but before we end, let's touch on the positives, because there are some. Looking back on my time playing this as a child, I definitely enjoyed it much more so then, but the game definitely was fun to play. This could just be my nostalgia for it, but I really don't think so. Sagas is a fun, senseless, short game to play if you're a DBZ fan. It is absolutely dated, which may also play a factor into whether you enjoy it or not. But I have to say, there is something very special about this game. There's really been no other DBZ game like it. Sure, you can compare it to Kakarot, but I really think they both have their own place in the DBZ series.
As a lifelong Dragon Ball fan, I can honestly admit that there was no better feeling than popping in a fresh PS2 disc and playing the newest entry in the Budokai series for the very first time. And with the massive success of the initial 3 games, there was little doubt in my mind a 4th entry was well on the horizon. But imagine my shock when a Budokai 4 was never announced, and my initial hesitance surrounding the upcoming console game, Budokai Tenkaichi. Now, don't get it twisted. The release of any new DBZ game is great news in my book. But by this point in 2005, I'd already played my fair share of Dragon Ball games that failed to meet my expectations. And to make matters even worse, I almost didn't get a chance to play this iconic entry as a kid. You see, this game being rated T, and me being about 9 years old at the time of release, well, I have a story for you. I have a distinct memory of a man approaching my dear grandmother while she was preparing to purchase this game for me in Walmart. This man in question attempted to persuade her not to purchase this game because it was a terrible influence on society. And everyone surrounding Goku on the box art was a demon. What a fucking loser, dude. I mean, to be fair, there are 2 actual demons in that picture, and my boy Broly basically makes 3, but Trunks, come on, man. Anyway, enough story time. Let's get to the real reason why we're all here today. Aside from me making videos on every Dragon Ball game to ever exist, of course. After playing this game for the first time 20 years ago, that's freaking wild, I can remember thoroughly enjoying this game. Or at least I think I do. That being said, most reviews that I've seen on Budokai Tenkaichi, while not directly hating on the game altogether, seem to think of it as a rough start to the trilogy. Now, I'll be the first to say that this could be true, and I may very well be confusing this title with some of the later games in the trilogy. But regardless, I figured there was no better way to test my theory than to replay Budokai Tenkaichi in its entirety. And when starting up the game, I knew immediately why I used to love this game so much. That badass fucking intro, bro. Now, I don't typically cover game intros in my videos these days, but this, damn. Everything from the animation, the music, the choreography is just so seamless and different than anything I've seen prior with these types of games. It's just beautiful and stands the test of time in my memory above any other. It doesn't even come close. But although the intro animation is great, the next determining factor here is unsurprisingly story mode. And unfortunately, this is where I began to notice some of the game's flaws. The combat just feels a bit unpolished. Not that it's terrible or anything, but in comparison to Budokai 3 and the later games in the Tenkaichi trilogy, it just feels really off. Aside from basic movements and melee attacks, there is also way too much repetition in the super attacks. So much of the roster will have the exact same melee super with very little, if any, difference in the attacks animation. Not to mention the key supers are very similar much of the time, like Rapid Energy Blast or Full Power Energy Blast. Major characters will have these basic ass supers as their own techniques, and it just feels really wrong when there could have been so many other classic techniques utilized, especially given certain major characters like Vegeta or Super Saiyan 3 Goku will have Super Explosive Wave as their ultimate. I mean, sure, it does some significant damage, but that's just so damn boring, at least in my opinion. Of course, it goes without saying that there are still a plethora of unique techniques, and they do look nice, but truth be told, I much preferred Budokai 3's combats. To play devil's advocate though, this is probably due to the fact they had to completely rework the game's combat system, as opposed to just upgrading certain little things like in the previous games. I mean, although it carries the word Budokai over, it is a completely new game. And I mean, these games were dropping every year at the time, without fail. And I would imagine it being quite a daunting task, especially with this type of roster. And when I had the chance to think about it, Budokai 1 suffered from a lot of the same exact problems that were fixed in later entries, so maybe Tenkaichi 2 will surprise me. However, this rough start to the trilogy is somewhat justified due to the complete reworking of not only the combat system, but many areas in the gameplay. Although of course still featuring invisible walls, and I use that term very loosely. The player is provided with a much more expansive area to explore and fight your enemies, complete with destructible environments like giant mountains that you can fly through, or better yet, punch and kick your opponent into with sheer force alone. This feels badass, and the much larger areas give you that free roam feeling that makes it feel akin to a more realistic Dragon Ball experience. Upon breaking these structures, you may find a Dragon Ball, which is located somewhere in each terrain. After collecting all 7, you're able to wish for a limited number of additional items, like rare characters for your roster, a password function, and an additional story scenario, the True World Tournament. I do enjoy these because they usher in some what-if scenarios, only available in this particular entry, like a complete reimagining of the OG Dragon Ball Tournament, Frieza vs. Cooler, and playing as each Saiyan as they take on the Tyrant Frieza, which basically just consists of every Saiyan, and even the freaking Cybermen, completely washing Frieza. What a sight that is. Along with the typical sagas you'd expect to see, come movie villains like Bojack and Broly, and also villain-centric scenarios where you play as Frieza, Cell, and Boo, taking on the Z-Warriors one by one. I always enjoy when games throw in these little extra sagas like this, because it's so cool to see the villain's perspective of things. Something else that stood out to me, which isn't necessarily distinctly for this game in particular, is the differentiations in the battles that you'll undergo. For instance, as opposed to the game just being fight after fight, requiring you to defeat your enemy by sheer force each and every time, certain battles in this game will force you to navigate just a bit differently. Like finishing off an enemy with a specific special move that's relative to the canon, defeating an enemy in a set time frame, or most commonly, surviving until the time runs out. Now you would think these in particular would be quite easy, in fact the easiest of the bunch. But contrary to popular belief, I found these to be the most difficult stages in the game. Great Ape Vegeta was no freaking joke, and neither is Great Ape Gohan, and one of the very first freaking levels nonetheless. Not that the game was overly simple to begin with, but they really ramped up the difficulty in these stages, man. I found that the easiest way to secure a win in this scenario is to charge up a Ki Blast, which will knock back the enemy, giving you the time you need to recharge, and do it all over again until the clock strikes 0. Boring, tedious, yes, but it works. Another key differentiation in the story mode is, well, the format of the story mode itself. Each saga or scenario is uniquely separated into an episodic-like format, almost like chapters with ends and beginnings. Along with the obvious progression from stage to stage, in correlation with the canon timeline of DBZ, you will have the option to scroll downwards, giving you the opportunity to take on optional battles for 100% completion. In these situations, you'll typically face off against the same villain, but with a different character, most commonly utilized when facing off against characters like the Cybermen, Cell Juniors, or of course, when the whole gang tries to take on Frieza. And all in all, I really did enjoy the format of this. I thought it was super unique, and it also just feels really organized. It just made the scenarios feel that much more rewarding to 100% complete. Completing stages in story mode will also unlock new characters for your roster, typically occurring once you finally defeat said villain for the final freaking time. Along with character unlocks, you'll get Z items, which can be used to customize your character's stats, like increasing their attack power and defense, in other modes such as Ultimate Battle. Now, I had been looking everywhere for this mode for quite some freaking time, specifically when I played Tenkaichi 3 because I had assumed that was where I remembered it from, but I was so happy that I finally found it here. Something about this mode is so cool to me. choosing your favorite character, upgrading them with your collected items, and then fighting through 100 enemies to reach that coveted #1 spot, with each enemy becoming progressively more and more difficult to overcome. On your journey to the top, you'll collect points, which increase upon every single win, and decrease in the instance that you're defeated. Occasionally, you'll also have the option to take on a more challenging opponent, sort of equivalent to when Super Smash Bros. Says new challenger approaching. Only difference here is you don't unlock a new fighter, but you will advance several ranks upwards upon your win. And given there's 100 fighters, just take the freaking risk. Next, it goes without saying that one of my favorite modes of all time returns in Tenkaichi, the World Tournament. Now, I've talked about this mode in depth in about every DBZ game I've covered. There's not really much difference here to justify a full section. Just trust me, it was a great time. A couple things to note though is that you will unlock new tournament difficulties by completing the initial ones. For instance, beating Novice unlocks Adept, being Adept unlocks Advance, and so on, with each rise in difficulty adding more fighters to the tournament. However, I found it excessively easy to sort of cheese the game here for a ring out, by either firing off powered up Ki Blasts a few times, or my absolute favorites, utilizing Goku's Dragon Throw. Some of the more difficult opponents may give you a tough time with the initial grab, but trust me, this shit works every time flawlessly. Like, if this was a newer game, that shit would get patched day 2, bro. You also, of course, have the obvious modes like dueling and training, options, and character encyclopedia, which showcases every character and transformation the game has to offer, complete with a lengthy bio for each and every one of them, if you're into that sort of thing. The one thing that did catch me quite off guard with the new mode selection is that, well, there's no shop here. Instead, you can do something called Z Item Fusion, which will not only allow you to create better Z items for your character to gain higher tier stat boosts, but unlocks the remainder of the roster when matched with the appropriate purple Pataras. Sounds kind of tedious, and it can be, but I, for some reason, had a really fun time doing this. But before we do go, let's give a brief analysis of the good, the bad, and the ugly of DBZ Budokai Tenkaichi 1. Now, I want to start off this outro by saying I had a really fun time playing through this game again. It brought back so many memories, seeing that unique story mode, the incredible opening cutscene, which I can get freaking Joe Biden level dementia and never forget. And of course, the character selection is top tier when compared to the previous games. However, that increase in the roster is likely what caused this game to not reach its full potential. So many of the fighters have the exact same combos, super and ultimate attacks, and even the ones that are unique just don't look that great, in my opinion. But maybe I'm just spoiled with the newer DBZ games, man, I don't know. Regardless, you can tell that this is kind of a prototype to what Tenkaichi 2 and 3 would become in the following years. And man, I am super excited to jump into Tenkaichi 2 next, so make sure to stick around for that. But to actually wrap things up here, if I had to give an honest score from 1 to 10, I think I'd give DragonBallZ Budokai Tenkaichi an honest 7.1. I mean, really, I wanted to go 6.9, but this game is too nostalgic for me to go below 7. After the release of Budokai Tenkaichi, fans were left to speculate what would come next to follow up this monumental title. And the answer we got was the release of perhaps the most underrated Dragon Ball game of all time, Budokai Tenkaichi 2. Now, I'll be the first to admit, while I didn't dislike the original Budokai Tenkaichi, I was a bit skeptical on whether this sequel would deliver on all of its promises. I mean, 129 characters covering the entirety of the DBZ and GT storyline? That feat seemed a bit far-fetched, even to me as a kid. Reason being, while the original Tenkaichi did expand the core roster and also brought in some new characters that we hadn't seen in the original Budokai trilogy, aside from appearance, the differences in gameplay between each of the characters was few and far between, especially for the transformations. However, once I finally started my playthrough of this underrated entry, for the first time in nearly 2 decades, mind you, I realized just how overlooked this game was in comparison to its slightly younger brother, Budokai Tenkaichi 3. And where better to begin what might become one of my favorite retrospectives of all time than story mode, Dragon Adventure. From as early as the first hour of my playthrough, I realized that this very well may be the most thorough rendition of DragonBallZ story that I've ever played, at least as far as the battle aspects go. The improvements here are monumental, to say the least. The sagas themselves take hours to get through, jam-packed with a plethora of content. Literally, every fight imaginable is included here. I'm not kidding. If Goku fights an enemy in the anime, then let's say he goes Super Saiyan halfway through the battle, as he's prone to do, well, that's another fight against the same exact enemy that you just fought. Vegeta fights a villain, and then the next battle, Vegeta slightly changes locations and fights the exact same villain again. That's 2 fights in a row fighting the same exact dude with the same exact form. I just know the devs took their time rewatching this entire series, and every new fight that occurred, no matter how insignificant or small, they were like, okay, that's a battle. Write that shit down. Another great inclusion in this game's story mode is the ability to fly freely across the continental Dragon Ball world, taking Dragon Adventure to new heights, literally. Taking notes from Budokai 3, Tenkaichi 2 allows the player to not only fly from battle to battle, giving you an even more thorough experience of the story, but also gives you the option to stop at other iconic locations along the way. And while Budokai 3 did have this implementation in that story mode, you were still unable to actually roam around these locations once landing. Instead, simply delivering a quick text-based dialogue or granting you an item real quick. However, in this entry, albeit not very far, we were able to explore these areas and interact with the cast that was found there at our leisure. During your visit, you may also come across Z items, money, Dragon Balls, and even enemies to spar with, further increasing your character's level and preparing you for the next main event. And some of these stages, well, you may actually need to prepare yourself for, because Tenkaichi 2 can actually get pretty difficult. And while this game does offer you the choice between different difficulties, at least for the story mode, even the normal difficulty is a quite daunting task at times, which is where the level system I mentioned comes into play. In RPG fashion, you're able to level up each respective character by completing battles. Again, drawing even more similarities to Budokai 3. You're also going to want to take advantage of the Z items that you come across, because they will not only grant you additional stat boosts like higher health, attack, and defense, but also increase your character's level based on the item utilized. Equipping these, along with other skill-based Z items, will make upcoming challenges a bit more manageable, especially when it comes to one of the 3 special battles in the game, which happen to be just another reason why I fucking love Budokai Tenkaichi 2. You'll notice that most fights will require you to win the battle, regardless if the character actually won that fight in the anime. But in these 3 special scenarios I mentioned, including a fight against Raditz, Dodoria, and Adult Gohan, you are not required to win. Initially, I had no idea that winning these battles would actually unlock secret scenarios, but still, you knew damn well I was not about to let Dodoria get the best of me. However, Dodoria and the other 2 did, many fucking times. These bouts are tough, rightfully so, which drew my suspicion even more so on what the drastic change in difficulty was for. Anyway, completing these battles unlocks complete and quite lengthy what-if scenarios, including a story where Raditz loses his memory and becomes a good guy, for a brief period. Zarbon attempting to overthrow Frieza and his goons and obtain eternal beauty, which was probably bro's headcanon the entire time. And also a complete reimagining of the Majin Buu saga, which honestly has way too many Goku vs Vegeta fights, which unfortunately brings me to some of my dislikes of Tenkaichi 2. Yes, there are some bad things. Don't get me wrong, while it is awesome that we get such an in-depth rendition of the Z story and GT, and the movies, sometimes it gets to be a bit too much. For instance, first Goku fights Vegeta in the tournaments. Okay, bet. Now we're moving locations to repeat the exact same fight, or even better, Goku versus Janemba in base, fully capable of turning Super Saiyan 3 mid-battle. But still, we have to fight the same version of Janemba, but this time starting as Super Saiyan 3. Even the movies, What If stories, and GT are covered in such excruciating detail, and for the stages, I mean, they are vastly improved upon here, at least in comparison to the previous game. Not only are we treated to a much better variety of, and some great looking stages at that, but fighting mid-air, on ground, and even underwater looks so much better. And the Dragon Balls found in these stages also give you more rewards than just characters, such as skills that are super useful, stat boosts, and items you can sell for high prices to get the same stat boosts. I mean, at least pretty much. However, while these stages are vastly improved, let's not forget this is the section where we're talking shit. And let me tell you, they leave out some key stages here, at least in terms of the story that they're attempting to cover. In the Fusion Reborn storyline, hell isn't available, which is like the premise of the entire movie. So the Z Fighters battle Janemba on the lookout, which is pretty much the opposite of hell. So, the fuck? And on top of that, you also fight Pycon in the Earth's World Tournament instead of the other world. Which, I mean, I get how adding all these stages could be troublesome. The game can only be so big, and they do cover a lot of ground here. But if you're going to try and tell the entirety of the story in such depth like this, you gotta at least add HFIL, man. Come on. And don't get me started on that damn ruined city. Now I know cities begin ruined pretty frequently in DBZ, but damn, they use that same stage over and over and over again anytime a fight takes place with a building in a 100-mile radius. I got so sick of seeing that stage, bro. And again, these are just some of many examples I could give you, but trust me, it gets really tedious and seems completely unnecessary at times. Although I will say it put a smile on my face to see them giving almost all of the OG movies and GT such good attention. So much so that the roster is massively improved upon since the original game, and not only in terms of numbers. For starters, the combat here is much more complex. Everything from basic melee attacks to supers receive a massive upgrade, and the supers actually feel relative to the characters and their transformations. Although I gotta say, having a full GT story and not having GT Goku and GT Vegeta felt pretty weird. I couldn't find a better place to throw that in, but anyway, back to the positives. The cast actually have more diverse moves now. In contrast to Tenkaichi 1, the rush melees are different between most characters, and even the ones who have that basic high-speed rush typically still have their own little twist on it. And an even bigger plus, they don't have that stupid background going on, which makes it look so much more clean in comparison. Also, you're able to tag in a member of your team at many times during the story, applying to situations where many of the Z fighters took on an enemy at one time. This is so much more efficient than having each of the fighters take on the enemies one at a time like the OG Tenkaichi did, and also helps the story flow way better. And damn, we need that because this game is already long enough. Your entire party will also gain experience points upon completion of a fight, which I found to be really cool. The teleporting, vanishes, and combo chains are so fluid. They feel seamless, and again, the supers look so much more clean too. Almost like this is the real Tenkaichi 1, and the actual Tenkaichi 1 was like a test version or something. Ultimate attacks can also completely alter the landscape, giving you a destroyed version of Earth or Namek, which looks so damn sick, especially the brief cutscene of the exploding planet upon impact. Speaking of the cutscenes, we've got some positives and negatives here. The negatives being, well, there certainly aren't many cutscenes at all. Most of the time, the dialogue between battles is text with some voiceovers, which drags on and on and on. And I only found this slightly intriguing during the what if battles because, well, I hadn't seen them before, or at least in like 19 years, so it was actually cool to experience that story. The positives, well, the few cutscenes they actually do have, which again are very infrequent and kind of random. Like you'd expect there to be some for some certain battles, and there's just not. But I digress. The ones that do exist are pretty well made for their era, and lengthy as well, covering some cool ass fight scenes that actually captured my attention and intrigue, like that badass Goku vs Vegeta scene at the end of the Saiyan arc. Also, the cutscene for the defeat of Kid Buu gave me chills. Like for some reason, this style is almost better than those super high quality fancy ones. Nothing tops the OG Tenkaichi intro though, I'll give it that. Once you finally complete Dragon Adventure, if you're as patient as I am, you'll have a vast majority of the characters unlocked as well as skills and Z-item fusions, which make a return in this game as well, allowing you to unlock quote-unquote secret characters and upgrade some Z-items as well. Again, another returning element is Ultimate Battle, which has evolved from being a fight your way to the top out of 100 enemies to fight your way to the top out of 7 or 8 or 5 enemies. In all seriousness, it does feel a bit more organized this way, separating each of the Ultimate Battles into separate scenarios, like Kakarot Road, which is actually based on the main antagonists Goku goes up against, in order, starting with the OG Dragon Ball Yamcha fight, through the final showdown with Kid Buu, even featuring a secret battle against Oob upon completion. Once beating Kakarot Road, you'll unlock other courses like the Ginyu Force course, which entails you going up against all of the Force's members at once, kind of like that one stage in Sparking Zero. If you know, you know. And similar to the previous Ultimate Battle, you will gain points as you progress, and each of the succeeding opponents will become more of a challenge. You'll also gain additional points based on oddly specific criteria as well. I will say, while this mode does feel a bit more organized, I do prefer the OG Ultimate Battle a bit more. The concept of fighting your way to the top out of 100 players just feels so much more interesting and fun to me. Next, of course, my all-time favorite mode, the World Tournament, returns. Again, I won't say too much about this. You can check my previous Budokai and Tenkaichi videos for all that, but it returns in similar fashion to the previous entries. This time around, the tournament is separated into 3 categories and numerous difficulties, leading to you winning Zenny upon the completion of each. Beyond that, you can also, of course, utilize dueling and training modes, dueling allowing you to access all the stages in the game. But before we do wrap this up, let's break it down and discuss our overall opinion on Dragon Ball Z, Budokai, Tenkaichi 2. Now, upon beginning this entry, I figured I'd enjoy it more than the OG Tenkaichi, but I had no idea just how much. That's because the combat is drastically updated, to the point where it makes the original Budokai Tenkaichi look more like a test demo than the first entry in a trilogy. The supers and the ultimates are more akin to the characters they represent as well. And the rush attacks, differentiations, and the combos make it feel so much more diverse and complete of a game as well. The story mode being extremely lengthy does take some patience to get through. Trust me, it's not easy, especially doing it all at once. And that's because the fights are repetitious as hell. Stages are kind of lacking in some departments given what they're trying to cover, and if you're playing on advanced difficulty like I attempted to for some of the content, you're in for a ride. I'll just be the first to tell you that. Again, it is really cool that they went this in depth with all the minor and major fights in the series, more so than just about any Dragon Ball game that I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing. It's just quite a remarkable feat in general, and if you're going to fit all of this content into one game, I mean, it's really difficult to do, and they did an okay job at it. We gotta give them that. And I forgot to mention earlier in the video that if you collect all the Dragon Balls on Namek, you summon Purunga, and you get 3 wishes instead of 1, which is cracked, bro. Definitely just fly to Namek, or just choose a Namek stage once you fucking collect. Just choose a Namek stage once you collect all 7 Dragon Balls, and that's just, if you're trying to collect all the Z-items, bro, that's the way to go. Very canon accurate. All in all, even with the game's flaws that it does have, this is definitely one that you don't want to miss, and absolutely one of my favorite Dragon Ball Z games of all time. I'm not just saying that, it's actually so good. Trust me, it's definitely worth the replay if you hadn't picked it up in a while like myself. Also, I gotta say, in some aspects, and don't roast me for this, guys, everyone's entitled to their opinion. In some aspects, not all, in some aspects, Tenkaichi 2 is better than Tenkaichi 3, and maybe one of the best Dragon Ball games to ever hit the market. For that reason, I'm giving Budokai Tenkaichi 2 a 9 out of 10. Which is super high for my rankings. Over the past 2 decades or so, fans have praised Budokai Tenkaichi 3 for its gameplay and its impressive roster, with many hailing it as the best DBZ game of all time. But with the release of the newest entry in the franchise, Sparking Zero, I wondered how well does Budokai Tenkaichi 3 hold up in comparison to its younger brother? Of course, it's to be expected. When a new game from the same series releases, there is to be updates, improvements made upon its predecessor, especially when the game in question was released 17 years later. Still, from my personal experience, many of the old school Dragon Ball games bring something to the table that the current generation just simply cannot replicate. So I thought we'd put my little theory to a test, to see not only if Sparking Zero is the pinnacle of Dragon Ball gaming, but to see if Tenkaichi 3 still holds up, comparisons between the two titans, including my opinion on which is the superior game, and of course, the ins and outs of Tenkaichi 3 as a whole. Now, when starting off, you'll initially notice that the main menu screen, while being very presentable, does not hold a damn candle to that of Sparking Zero, which, in all honesty, is to be expected for an old school anime game. However, one factor that bothers me, at least a tad bit, is that there's far too many unnecessary game modes. For instance, certain options here, like, let's say, Character Encyclopedia, could have easily been put together with other non-battle centric modes and a more presentable extras mode or something of that sort. However, once you select story mode, that's when the game flourishes. The story here is separated neatly into distinct sagas, including ones you'd expect to see in any Dragon Ball title, like Saiyan, Frieza, Cell, and Buu. However, on your journey, you'll also unlock unique scenarios, which not only are absent from the game's successor, but some that are specific to this game entirely. Now, that's not to suggest by any means that Sparking Zero is lacking in this department. And if you've seen my videos, you know that I've previously praised that game for its ability to innovate and create a multitude of stories branching off the main campaign. What I'd really like to focus on here, though, is where Sparking Zero did end up falling short. And there's 3 specific sagas, we'll call them, in which I personally felt that it did. Firstly, and perhaps most apparently, OG Dragon Ball. One thing the newest Dragon Ball game lacked is not only Dragon Ball characters in general, but any real reference to the OG series whatsoever. In stark contrast, not only provides us with an, albeit brief, actual storyline for the Dragon Ball series, but a plethora of characters as well, some of which I had completely forgotten were in this game and was quite a welcome surprise to me. This includes the more obvious ones like General Tao and King Piccolo, but the game also brings in some very rare casts from Goku's origins, like General Blue, Nam, Hater, and perhaps the biggest surprise of all, freaking Devilman. That is so bizarre. Now, for some fans, particularly those who grew up with Super, it may feel a bit silly to play as these characters who are considered a bit weaker in comparison to the likes of End of Z Goku, Gogeta, or Omega Shenron. But for us OG fans, and I'm speaking on the ones who grew up with DBZ and Dragon Ball running simultaneously on Toonami, the good old days, man. Or perhaps even older fans who were aware of the series from its original Japanese run. If you fall into either one of those categories, then I know for a fact that this was an absolute treat. Sure, there's a good possibility that Sparking Zero will add more OG Dragon Ball characters to the mix in the form of DLC. And honestly, I really hope they do. But for now, and also a bonus, these characters are in the base game. That's a big point for Tenkaichi 3. The second saga in question, Dragon Ball GT. Now, to be fair, Sparking Zero does add a significant amount of GT characters to the mix, enough to at least warrant this, my personal opinion, being a controversial take. But regardless, I'm gonna stand on business. The fact that GT has its own story here is really cool, and I definitely appreciated playing through it because, let's be real guys, GT in itself isn't bad. I mean, those first 20 episodes or so, I mean, that's arguably pretty trash. There's some pretty solid battles and villains in this series as a whole, one of which, Super 17, makes his grand appearance here, and for some odd reason, not in Sparking Zero. Now, Super 17 is one of the 3 main villains in that entire series, so I did find his exclusion from Sparking Zero to be quite strange, and as many have pointed out, he's likely to be one of the first major candidates for a DLC release, but still, it is really weird he was excluded from the base game. The last saga that Tenkaichi Tenkaichi 3 did better was the movies. Not only do they include some movie characters that aren't in Sparking Zero, like Base Form Garlic Jr. for instance, but there's an entire scenario for movie villains, played in order from Bardock vs. Frieza all the way through Hirudegarn. Some of these movies even consisting of 2 separate episodes, usually occurring when the good guys get stomped the fuck out by the likes of Broly or even Bojack, and you get the unique experience to relive some of these awesome moments in the game. It's worth pointing out that this also occurs in the main timeline sagas, where a villain will unanimously win the battle, usually against a plethora of Z fighters. And in this scenario, you'll switch back and forth between them and the heroes. Some examples of this are when Frieza dominates the Z Warriors on Namek, and also when Cell does the exact same thing on Earth. Some might say I'm being a bit nitpicky here with the whole story mode and lack thereof, but I truly don't think that's the case. The devs here likely felt that they need to cut the OG and certain GT characters from the roster just to save room for the, of course, plethora of super characters that were introduced to the series in Sparking Zero. And although this is very valid, as it's new and they're very fun to play with, I do still wish they worked on finding a better middle ground here. But again, in this day and age, I guess that's what DLC is for. In contrast, Sparking Zero excels in taking the story of Dragon Ball to new heights, creating so many unique opportunities to deviate from the original and traditional Z and Super storylines, even introducing some brand new villains into the mix as allowed, like Gohan Black, which I thought was absolutely sick. This, in my opinion, is badass and kind of makes up for the fact they missed the mark on a lot of the original material. I mean, realistically, the base game can only be so big. If you do want to hear more of my takes on Sparking Zero as a whole, I made multiple videos on that game already, and I'll leave some of the links up here, somewhere up there. I'm not good at that. In terms of the overall roster though, it's a competitive landscape for sure. Again, as mentioned previously, Sparking Zero did remove many Dragon Ball GT and even certain versions of movie villains from the mix just due to the overwhelming amount of super characters that were introduced. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a worse game for that. It felt nothing short of refreshing, playing through the story of Super in Budokai / Tenkaichi format. And finally, utilizing those new characters who, in all reality, are a decade old at this point. For the first time in this environment, really made it feel like we were entering a new era in the Dragon Ball universe. However, while this is the case, in terms of each player's combat, many, and I mean many features are carried over. Like the plethora of unique forms certain characters have, which allow you to utilize different movesets, super attacks, and even ultimates. The DP formats, in which a player is allowed a maximum of 15 points per team to help restore some balance to the game and prevent players from using only the broken characters. Even the mechanics like teleporting behind an enemy as they attack or chain teleporting to enhance your combo. But at this point, many of you are probably thinking, duh. This is basically Budokai Tenkaichi 4. Not even basically, it literally is. I figured these similarities were still worth pointing out as the original Budokai trilogy had some stark differences in its combat between the three. But that being said, I still haven't played Budokai Tenkaichi 1 or 2 in years. And I mean, over a decade. So perhaps they did make some major improvements over that trilogy. And if that's the case and this video here does well, then we'll find out together. This relates to the Supers and Ultimates as well, as many of them are carried over from Tenkaichi 3 to Sparking Zero. However, the graphical upgrades and choreography make these slight differences feel so much more apparent, and something about that Sparking Zero moveset is just so top tier, that without much question or thought, I have to give this one to Sparking Zero. I also felt it was worth briefly touching on the difficulty between the games. Now that being said, Dragon Ball games were never known, to me at least, for their difficulty. I mean, sure, in comparison to some other anime or even fighting games in general, Dragon Ball games may have a bit more of a challenge, at least in the past. But newer games like Kakarot felt so lacking in that department, especially prior to the DLCs. However, Tenkaichi 3 certainly does deliver in difficulty. I mean, normal mode is no joke. Omega Shenron threw my ass for a loop multiple times, and Kid Buu was not to be taken lightly. But still, when compared to the unexpected level of challenge found in Sparking Zero, overall at least, the difficulty just doesn't compare. Sparking Zero had so many battles that me and many other players felt were a little bit too difficult for their own good, to the point of nearly rage quitting without going back to easy mode, and I would never. And at least in Tenkaichi 3, Grade 8 Vegeta is a reasonable fight. Now, after playing through the initial 2 games, I have a bit of a better understanding why Budokai Tenkaichi 3 in particular became the cultural phenomenon that it did. That being said, I still hold my opinion that Budokai Tenkaichi 2 is an amazing title, and one that is a strong contender for the best Dragon Ball game of all time. But I also recognize that I may feel that way, mainly because I'm largely into the campaign side of games, while others may not feel that exact same way. And that being said, when it comes to story mode, Budokai Tenkaichi 2 does undisputably blow 3 out of the water. But I also can't ignore that the combat has definitely improved throughout the trilogy. Where BT1 felt like a test demo, BT2 felt like what Budokai Tenkaichi 1 could have been given a bit more time. BT3 feels like the natural evolution to that game. The gameplay in general feels more polished, with melees being so crisp and smooth. Supers and ultimates are plentiful and feel very appropriate for the characters in each of their forms. And the vanishes are just so fucking fun to pull off, especially when performed in a combo. For playing this again for this video, I unlocked new characters I couldn't even dream of, like the fusion peel-off machine. I mean, I get playing as Yajirobe, but who in the world is gonna play as these guys? Also, having a more complete GT roster is a huge one for me. I thought it was so off-putting that in Budokai Tenkaichi 2, we played as Z Goku and Z Vegeta during that portion of the storyline, going as far as having adult Goku fighting Omega Shenron in the cutscene. But here, GT gets its final shine, having each transformation and version of GT Goku, as well as a separate character slot for GT Vegeta. All in all, the character selection and customization here is fantastic, offering tons of ways to spice up your favorites, from color changes to improved stats and Z items, expanding upon the implementation in the previous game. Each of the roster feels super distinct, and again, I love the different variations of certain characters based on the eras of the story, like early, mid, and end of Z Goku, for instance. Touching on the mode selection here, Ultimate Battle returns again, but with another new variation, allowing you to fight through pre-made battles with your own customized team. You'll gain points and get ranked based on performance at the end of each, which sort of reminds me of Custom Battle in Sparking Zero. Within Ultimate Battle, you can also find Battle Sim, which at first seemed kind of weird to me, but once I got the hang of it, it was pretty fun. You have 10 days, more like seconds, to train your character for the upcoming battle, choosing to train defense, offense, explore, rest, or eat a senzu bean in the process. Your actions during these 10 days reflecting directly on the amount of health, power, defense, and more of your character of choice when the battle arises. And while this was pretty unique, it definitely shows its age, and not something I'd go back to over and over again. I also think the 100 Fighter Ultimate Battle from Budokai Tenkaichi 1 is still the best version of this mode. World Tournament mode is majorly upgraded here as well, finally ditching the old format of Novice, Adept, Advanced, and having specific tournaments that have specific difficulties, like World Tournament being easy and Cell Games being hard, due to the fact that you have to carry over remaining HP from the previous fight. All in all, this World Tournament is very much aligned with how Sparking Zero structured its version. The key difference though is that these tournaments will only be available at certain times, noted by the timer on the main menu page for it. Beyond this, there's of course dueling, which allows you to select through all the stages available in the game. And let me tell you, these are improved as well, having a wider range in each and a much more expansive variety, my favorite of which being Muscle Tower. I love this in Budokai 2, and I sure as hell love it here. Also, there's of course training, options, and character encyclopedia available as well. Over my decades of being a DBZ fan, if there's one criticism that I've heard most frequently, it's that all the games are far too similar. And up through, well, the release of Battle of Z, and aside from several handheld releases, I'd have to completely agree. Now, this isn't to say that the Budokai Tenkaichi or the DragonBallZ games weren't fun. I mean, hell, I've made some of my best memories gaming with them. But the main issue was that none of these titles ever pushed the boundaries and did something noticeably different with the material, instead sticking by the same old cash cow, Raditz through Kid Buu storyline.
In fact, it wasn't until Fighter Z released and shook up the space that I began to vaguely remember there was once a game fairly similar to this. One that attempted to go out of the comfort zone and reach an audience of perhaps more traditional fighting games. One that I, as a child, completely dismissed as utter trash, just because it was out of my comfort zone. And that game was Super Dragon Ball Z. Not to be confused with the similarly titled anime, Super Dragon Ball Z was released initially at arcades in late 2005, before later being ported to the PlayStation 2 console the following year. And at the time, I think it's safe to say, although I was always open to diversity in DBZ games, this one in particular confused the hell out of me. So much so that I never saw it through till now. And what a better way to explore my curiosity than by replaying it to its absolute entirety. And in this review, we'll discuss why Super Dragon Ball Z is such a unique title. If, upon replay, I found it to be better than my initial playthrough, and of course, the ins and outs of the game as a whole. I'd like to start off by saying that it's hardly an exaggeration to state that few DBZ games have captured my intrigue quite as quickly as this particular title. The first and perhaps most notable point of this interest is the game's graphics, which appear vastly different than any title I've played prior. While typical DBZ games seem to draw inspiration from the anime, Super DBZ's presentation is clearly manga inspired. First, noted by the stages, which look as if they came straight off the panels of the manga itself. These battlefields are also completely destructible, which seems almost a given at this day and age, but at time of release, this was something we had almost never seen prior. Some of my favorites here were the Cell Games Arena, and of course the World Tournament stage. Kicking somebody straight into that wall just never got old. This manga-like aesthetic is also noted by the accessories of each of the cast, the attacks, and even the boom or flop illuminating from each of the hit effects. All in all, the game goes above and beyond to make it feel like you're playing through the manga specifically. While I could easily understand how this title may not be as flashy as some might prefer, and trust me, that's a completely valid opinion. Personally, I not only found this to be refreshing, an extremely unique take on a Dragon Ball game, but also visually appealing, almost giving me a nostalgic vibe of classic Dragon Ball, although it's Dragon Ball Z, which is something that I likely wouldn't have appreciated quite as much as a kid. Aside from the actual gameplay, this style is present throughout the entirety of the game. Even the main menu itself is reminiscent of a page straight out of the manga, and quickly became one of my favorite and most memorable mode selection screens of all time. These panels also offer us 7 unique modes to explore, 2 of which requiring us to fight through a handful of enemies, and compared to most modern DBZ games, these guys are absolutely no pushovers. While it is no secret that traditional fighting games of this nature are typically geared toward a 2-player experience, still the depth of the 1-player modes is relatively impressive. The first of which, titled Original, is, well, the closest thing to a proper story mode you'll set your eyes on while playing this game. Because while not having much of a story per se, takes us through 7 challengers, each increasing in power and difficulty as you progress, reflected uniquely by their battle power, which is shown in a really cool format on little scouters before each battle. Not to go too off topic, but a cool detail that I enjoyed is that these scouters tend to break when encountering more powerful opponents. Like in this case, Perfect Cell, whose battle power is much over 9,000. Cell is in fact so impactful to this game that he is the only battle or time in its entirety where a full-on pre- and post-fight cutscene is displayed on his behalf. Bro really thinks he's that guy. And even more odd, the fact that Majin Buu is a playable character in the game, yet you never face off against him. I mean, what? I just can't comprehend why. I mean, he's not even a secret unlock. Speaking of which, these secret or additional characters can only be unlocked via wishes in Dragon Summoning mode. Initially, 3 characters will be available in the Enhanced Wish section, but after completing about 10 or so hunts for the Dragon Balls, 2 even more secret characters can be unlocked, bringing the roster from 13 to a modest 18 playable fighters. Okay, you got me. This might not seem like much, and I mean, it really isn't. So it may surprise you even more, with such a small roster, they still chose to implement some really unique characters. Like Videl, Mecha Frieza, Demon King Piccolo. What the hell is DKP doing here? And freaking Chi-Chi.
Chi-Chi. This roster is diverse. Now for a Budokai Tenkaichi game, this would be much less jarring. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. But for a game that already has such a minuscule roster, I found it to be, at the very least, a weird marketing decision. Cool for the hardcore fans who just are curious about how Chi-Chi would play. But to the casual fan or someone simply looking for a good fighting game, maybe not. But to those casual fans, I tell them Chi-Chi is kind of badass though. In fact, all of the characters are, as they not only each feel extremely unique in their movesets, but the game manages to balance the roster exceptionally well, mostly due to each of these characters having varying stats, which helps, say, Chi-Chi have a slight edge given that she has a higher action bar. The action gauge can be utilized by either double tapping to dash or by rushing an opponent with a devastating blow. Thank God for this, because without the cooldown on the action gauge, this rush attack would be extremely broken. And I'd also imagine it being very frustrating and annoying on the receiving end. On the other hand, some of these characters might excel in other areas, like power or strength, helping to even out the playing field and give distinct advantages and disadvantages to each respective party. But of course, to access some of these more interesting characters, we'll need to utilize Dragon Summoning Mode, which can be accessed by collecting all 7 of the Dragon Balls. Upon summoning Shenron, this devious dragon will not only give you the option to get additional characters, but also some new stages, like King Kai's planet. And perhaps more interestingly, different narrators for the mode selection screen. And while Goku and Vegeta are pretty fun to use, I would strongly advise against using the Majin Buu option. This could legitimately drive somebody mad. You can also use these balls to learn a new super attack, or even a rival's attack, like Gohan's Soaring Dragon Strike, and a plethora of attack and defense buffs, among other cool little prizes. The balls themselves can be accumulated easiest by first creating a character card in customization mode, and then playing through original with the respective character you designed the card for. In this case, each battle will grant you a Dragon Ball, and given there's 7 battles here, I think you could guess what the outcome is. Character cards, however, are not only essential for collecting Dragon Balls, but for customizing your roster to better suit your preference in battle and style, granting you the ability to not only alter the color scheme of the cast, or even give them some funky accessories, but utilize their skill tree as well, which will give you your choice of 1 additional perk, usually between 2 or 3 different choices, each time the EXP bar is filled. These upgrades can range from attack and defense buffs, lengthier and quicker recoveries of your ultimate gauge, and even powerful new special moves like Spirit Bomb for Goku, or even instant transmission, which teleports you directly behind or in front of your enemy. That being said, you must choose these carefully though, because once your skill tree is completed, there is no going back, which may sound terrible to some because of course you want to get all the attacks and buffs that you possibly can for your favorite character. But trust me, this not only ensures that the cast isn't too overpowered, but also adds to the level of customization that each character receives, which in my opinion is where this game truly shines, allowing everyone to have different attacks and feel more distinct in comparison to their colleagues. Once this skill tree is completed, your character will likely be a force to be reckoned with. I mean, if you thought Majin Vegeta was scary before, you don't even want to imagine what this man is capable of with all those attack buffs. However, while you can't change your skill tree, the game still encourages further grinding with these maxed out characters, because, well, you can further max them out by accessing new supers from other cards you've already completed. Of course, over time, I ended up loving this formula, and each character card I made felt distinctly my own. Also, take my advice, you'll want to grind these character cards out before entering your characters in Z Survivor mode. Here, you'll want to utilize everything you've learned from original mode, as although the first few matches may not be anything special, you are tasked with defeating at least 9 enemies, with each adversary becoming increasingly more of a threat. Some will be tactical, blocking, sidestepping, attacking at appropriate times, while others just spam supers and make it damn near impossible to counter and likely pissing you the hell off. I'm honestly not sure which type is more dangerous, but regardless, you'll want a lot of practice because the combat isn't nearly as simple as the Budokai series, or even more recently, Kakarot. This combat is the real deal, and can absolutely deter some players from completing the game. Basic punches and kicks are simple enough. Blocking and sidesteps are also allowed to dodge incoming blows, as well as more uniquely flight, which can be used by essentially double jumping, allowing you to move a bit faster while in air. And last but not least, the action bar is a noob's best friend. But to really excel in this game, you'll want to master your combos and special moves, which in terms of input, I found to be of similar nature to Tenkaichi, but this is a real game, so it's much more acceptable. The special moves themselves are not usually overly difficult to perform and will not drain your ki, where in contrast, ultimate attacks will, some much more than others, and took me quite some time to get the feel for it. But once good old muscle memory kicked in and I practiced for long enough, these became much less taxing to pull off, and looking back on it, I actually almost prefer this method. Reason being, this game's combat, as opposed to most other DB games, has depth. You actually have to think about what you're doing to become a better player, clearly requiring more skill than other members of the DB family. And of course, having to execute some difficult and at times lengthy combinations can feel super rewarding when finally pulling them off. A prime example of this is again Spirit Bomb, which requires your ultimate gauge to be entirely full to execute, and to fully reap the benefits, we'll need to charge it for a long time. I mean, it isn't that long, but for the speed these flights move, it's pretty damn long. Also, Galagun was one of my favorites to utilize, as it does massive damage, and the repetitious blasts are sure to hit your opponent. It's also worth noting that some characters have the ability to turn Super Saiyan as usual, but it is implemented a bit different in this particular game. Once transformed, although much more powerful, you'll want to get as many hits as possible, as fast as possible, because you only have about 10 seconds in this form, which again I have mixed feelings about. I mean, on one hand, it is really stupid to have to save up your ultimate gauge to use this for just a few seconds, and with the comms always blocking and spamming supers, you may never have a chance to even use it. But to play devil's advocate, this also balances the game even further and makes it so one character isn't much more powerful than the rest. Back to Z Survivor mode. Each fight you complete here will grant you the opportunity to spin the, I guess we'll call it the Dragon Wheel. The wheel will grant you a plethora of options, some benefiting you in the long term and some in the short term. These range from perhaps the easiest option to land on, collecting a Dragon Ball, or 2, an upgrade to help you get through the fights ahead, like attack and defense boosts, faster accumulating XP, and coming towards the later matches, what you really want to utilize, health recovery, which varies from 20% to a full 100%. Sounds easy enough. I'll just always land on health recovery, right? No, you won't. The wheel will start going insanely fast after a while, leading to you having to completely guess when to stop it, and probably making your eyes hurt quite a bit. The one time I actually beat this mode, I stopped the wheel when it was visually 3 options away from health recovery, and used attack and defense buffs prior, some on purpose and some accidentally. But man, that feeling of victory after playing this mode for 100 times was a feeling like no other. But beyond this, you have of course versus mode, which is where you can play against a friend, selecting any stage of your choosing. By the way, if you guys would like to see a follow-up video of me doing a bunch of 2-player material on this game, let me know in the comments below. You also have options and training, where if I were you, I'd spend a solid amount of time here prior to beginning Z Survivor at the very least. The PlayStation 2 was home to some of the most iconic games of all time, and Dragon Ball was no exception. Beginning with the original Budokai in 2002 and ending its life cycle with the iconic Tenkaichi 3 in 2007, DBZ had an incredible 5+ year run on this legendary console, or so many of us thought. You see, there was still one more PS2 exclusive that would not only close out Dragon Ball's lengthy run on the console, but mark as a proper conclusion to the original Budokai series. That game was DragonBallZ Infinite World, dubbed by much of the community as the long-desired Budokai 4. This title was initially released in 2008 and has, at least in my opinion, seen a recent rise in popularity due to it initially being slept on by the fans, with some even completely unaware of its existence at all. Understandably so. 2008 was 2 whole years after the PlayStation 3 had released, and Burst Limit, Dragon Ball's first title on the next generation console, had already been released in stores
several months prior. However, while this title flew under the radar for many, it still holds some core memories for me. Infinite World was released on November 4th of 2008, which was a mere 2 weeks after my childhood back surgery, which resulted in me being out of school for nearly 3 entire months. And while the latter might sound great, it was actually a terrible experience for me. And considering I had already 100% burst limit, Infinite World released at seemingly the perfect time. I mean, I can vividly remember staying up endless hours just to 100% the skill list or beat the notorious Fighter's Road. But after I was done reminiscing, all this had me wondering, was Infinite World actually as good as I remember it to be? Or was it simply there for me at the right place and the right time? To figure out the answer to this burning question, I replayed Infinite World nearly 16 years later. And in this video, we'll discuss if Infinite World is actually the true successor to the Budokai series. If it's as good as fans claim it to be, is the game as difficult as many say that it is? And of course, the ins and outs of the title as a whole. Now, when beginning my playthrough, I quickly noticed that Infinite World takes massive inspiration from not only the most recent in the trilogy, Budokai 3, but pays homage to each entry in the numbered trilogy respectively. This I instantly recognized due to the format of the game's story mode, Dragon Mission, which takes some clear inspiration from Budokai 2's board game aesthetic. Only this time around, no matter who you're playing as, you'll only use the Goku character as opposed to chasing down enemies and collecting items, like in Budokai 2, which I personally enjoyed, but I'm well aware was a divisive addition to the gameplay. While advancing along the map, you'll also notice there are several unique points of interest, the most frequent being the face of another character, which features the next major battle in the storyline. You'll also come across Baba's crystal balls, which allow you to replay the fully animated cutscenes featured in-game, which haven't been seen, at least of this caliber, since the original Budokai. Granted, they only appear for the most relevant of fights, and being acquainted with modern DBZ fighters, they're not anything to go absolutely berserk for. But in my opinion, the art style here is really cool, and for a late era PS2 game, I think it holds up pretty damn well. Another element of Dragon Mission that absolutely caught me off guard was that in between battles, you will embark on a plethora of mini games, which at first I wasn't entirely sold on, but I came to find that the variety of them is really quite impressive and truly helps this game stand out as its own unique title rather than being just a mashup of the best of the Budokai series. Sometimes these mini games will task you with a bit of platforming, navigating your way throughout iconic Dragon Ball environments, like making it to the end of Snake Way, which is a piece of the story that we very rarely get the opportunity to play through. These mini games will also feature battle events, like stopping Cell with appropriately timed Tri-Beam, or playing as villains like Frieza, ripping Piccolo to shreds with the 1,000,007 death beams. I mean, chuckle beams. Some of these I even went super hard in, like the timed events, which were great for testing and strengthening my reaction time in my advanced stage. Still got it, boys. Now, I mention these minigames to such an extent because it's my belief that this is what the original Budokai was meant to entail originally. It just doesn't make much sense to include the full Nelson Raditz minigame, then just never do anything with that ever again. So long story short, perhaps here they got to fully see out their vision for the original Budokai in Infinite World. Last but definitely not least, the combat system. As soon as I began the first battle, I knew I was in for a great time. This is because the game carries over much of the same core functions as Budokai 3, like swiftly dodging opponents' blows, attack and guard throws, performing a teleport chain, and then teleporting on top of the teleports. You have a variety of attacks here, but I digress. These functions feel even more smooth and refined when compared to Budokai 3, almost as if they've learned more since then and mastered that combat system here. What does not carry over from Budokai 3, however, is Dragon Rush. Instead, we simply have Aura Burning Mode, in which you will gain a 5% boost to your stats, lessen your knockback, and gain the ability to absolutely abuse the teleport system at the exchange of your ki draining quite rapidly. This, in my opinion, is an incredible upgrade, as Budokai 3 is one of my all-time favorite DBZ games, yet Dragon Rush is one of my least favorite aspects of that game by far. It's just far too annoying and takes away from the good aspects of the gameplay for
just a bit too long. However, while this can be great, unlike hyper mode, or burning mode will not drain your stamina. Instead, it will slowly deplete throughout battle, which can be quite frustrating, and worst of all, enemies will use this to absolutely spam aura burning mode. And not only that, but you'll witness these AI using some advanced techniques, like combo cancels. Yet the game, despite having a fairly lengthy tutorial in the beginning of the Saiyan arc, will never mention or teach you how to perform these. Starting off in the Saiyan saga, there were times where I thought to myself, okay, Infinite World is just a bit more challenging than your typical DBZ game, but I really enjoy a challenge. Boy did I take that back fast, because as soon as I got to the Frieza fight, that's when I realized how difficult this game can actually be. Previous to this, I was able to maintain some dignity and play through every stage on normal difficulty. But once I got here, I switched to easy, then unapologetically very easy difficulty. And Frieza, he was still whooping my ass. I couldn't believe it. This point in the story is where I finally came to the realization that the game really isn't that difficult. It just wants you to use additional items to your advantage. As opposed to the previous Budokai entries, where these do exist but feel much more optional, Infinite World forces you to take advantage of these customization options by accessing the shop. Here you can use the Zenny you've acquired from battles to purchase numerous things like supers for your characters, upgrades to said supers for a steeper price, transformations, and new abilities like Fighter's Body for instance, which will grant you a massive amount of additional health if you upgrade it enough times. Equipping a fully upgraded Fighter's Body, in addition to a couple attack boosts and a healing item like Pig Roast, will put you in a much better position. And with this knowledge, I could finally handle normal difficulty, even hard difficulty on some upcoming battles. I was feeling way more confident and beginning to really love this game. That being said, getting deeper and deeper into my playthrough, I ended up really enjoying the system here, as it forces you to take advantage of the customization and the items to make your favorite character truly feel like your own. Over time, making them more and more formidable against villains who feel rightfully powerful. Throughout the majority of your first playthrough, you will play solely as Goku, aside from a sprinkle or two of Son Gohan here and there. But you will also likely notice there's a ton of missions that are inaccessible at this time. Once completing Goku's story, you will gain the ability to go through the entirety of Dragon Mission once again, this time utilizing all of the characters who were unplayable on your first go-around, with the inclusion of some playable villains like Frieza and Cell, which again I found was organized strikingly similar to the original Budokai. It's worth noting that many of these battles will divert from the typical gameplay a bit, creating an environment where you must complete alternate tasks like survive for 60 seconds against a buffed up character, or even allowing you to choose between different paths of progression, with multiple battles becoming available at one time. My only downside though is that there aren't many cutscenes featured here in the second story, with the exception of some of the most relevant battles like Super Vegeta versus Semi-Perfect Cell, which is an all-time favorite of mine, and of course Gohan versus Cell, which I was extremely surprised wasn't featured in the original story. But again, I digress. This second story will also grant you access to a plethora of minigames and just about every relevant fight with the characters and transformations the game has, utilizing Frieza's numerous forms, which I always love when games do because I feel like these are often slept on and completely forgotten about. Beyond this, the game further covers the GT storyline, much more so than Budokai 3, including battles against iconic villains like Baby Vegeta, Super 17, and even Omega Shenron, and also features an additional arc called Another Story, in which you can fight movie favorites like Janemba, Cooler, Broly, and even play as Bardock. All of these unique characters bring the roster to a grand total of 42, which is only 4 more than Budokai 3, but interestingly enough, several Budokai 3 characters were actually swapped out, giving us nearly 10 new characters to the Budokai franchise, including Great Saiyan Man 2, wonder who that could be, everyone's favorite filler character, Qui-Gon, and even Pen from GT, whose super attack I found surprisingly fun to pull off. And while the addition of GT characters is certainly a welcome change by me, controversially, 2 of these slots were designated to additional Goku and Vegeta characters from their GT personas, which on first glance seems a bit lame, but the differences in their combat style and their super attacks make them feel sincerely unique in comparison to their Z counterparts. Speaking of supers, each character for the most part will have 2 or 3 unique super attacks, which can be customized to your liking prior to engaging in battle. For the most part, these can either be purchased from the shop, or you can additionally save up to buy their upgraded level 2 and 3 versions at a much more hiked up price. Or in certain scenarios, your character will automatically have skills locked into your tray before battle. For the returning characters, you'll notice that many of these supers are carried over from the previous Budokai entry, but I thoroughly enjoyed exploring much of the new roster's moveset, performing Final Flash as GT Tenkaichi Vegeta, without it being an ultimate, just felt so seamless. As like many other elements of the gameplay, the majority of the ultimates maintain the same format as Budokai 3, where the player attempts to land a charged up blow, and then tries to fill up their attack gauge more so than the AI, by timing it to the best of their ability. If this is done efficiently, the onslaught will carry on longer, typically generating a significant amount of additional damage to the opponent. However, not every ultimate is created equal. Some perform more like beefed up super attacks, bypassing filling up the gauge entirely and simply launching a blast that is extremely tough to dodge. These attacks, like Piccolo's Special Beam Cannon or Teen Gohan's Super Kamehameha, ended up being some of my absolute favorites to pull off, not only due to the ease of them, but they also help speed up the ever so lengthy battle, which at times felt to go on for just a tad too long, especially if you're using a higher difficulty like I was in the game's secret unlock, Fighter's Road. In similar fashion to the games that came prior, Infinite World features several unique modes, with a mysterious additional mode only purchasable post completion of the main story. This mode, in my opinion, is reminiscent of Budokai 3's Dragon Arena, as it's not only once again hosted by Commander Red, but you also fight opponent after opponent, each continuously becoming more and more difficult of an adversary, racking up tons of cash in the process. Assuming you have the money handy, you can also purchase additional difficulties for this mode, like Very Hard and Holy Z difficulty, which is extremely not as crazy as I expected it to be. While I assume this would prove way too much of a challenge for me as I progressed along this post-game mode. And don't get me wrong, there were certainly some challenging moments, but I beat just about every fighter on my first try. That's because I had a pretty solid strategy nailed down by this point, along with my purchase abilities like Fighter's Body and Strength Boost. I also purchased further upgrades like additional spots on my skill tray, allowing for more abilities for my characters to utilize during battle, and I also began using Teen Gohan as a main, as once again his ultimate Super Kamehameha tends to hit much more frequently and has some great range. Utilizing Z difficulty will also grant you the most setting possible for each fight, allowing you to absolutely splurge in the shop, which granted sounds like it would be a lot more beneficial before beating story mode, but realistically is still much more useful than you'd probably imagine. This is because there are so many skills to purchase that if you want to go above and beyond and buy all of them, you'll have to spend some serious time in this mode. We both know you don't want to go through the entire game with just Kamehameha, so these and their expensive upgrades prove to be just about necessity for me. Along with all the other abilities we previously mentioned, each character can also be purchased in the shop upon completing their arc in the story, which also includes the option for additional costumes, with some, like Goku, having way more than others. Some of my favorites being Trunks' alternate skin and even battle damage Goku, whom I decided to take with me to Fighter's Road, even while knowing that Teen Gohan will be so much more efficient. Something about a shirtless Goku just looks so badass. Don't act like y'all don't know what I'm talking about. After completing the first page of Fighter's Road, similar to Dragon Mission, you can choose to play through different pages of the map, each having their own unique challenges and battles to fight through. I can only assume these get much harder as you progress, and if you guys would like to see me play through the entirety of Fighter's Road and buy out everything in the shop, then make sure to like this video and let me know in the comments if you guys want to see a part 2. Anyway, beyond Fighter's Road, there is, of course, maxing out your skill list, collecting the Dragon Balls through minigames, which grant you ultimates, additional costumes, or even items. In all honesty, I mean, you gotta do it once, but also wasn't really worth the hassle of the time devoted to collect all the Dragon Balls. It's worth pointing out that fusions also make a return to the game in the form of both Potara and Metamoran, which grant the player some powerful new attacks for a very limited time, and utilize the same process as the previous games. What was super disappointing, however, and something I felt the lack of throughout my entire playthrough, was that there was no World Tournament mode, which is something that I and many other fans of the series look forward to in DBZ games of this nature. However, other classics do make a triumphant return, like Duel Mode, where you can play your typical player versus com, 2-player, or our favorite, com versus com. What a great way to spend your time that must be. I found Duel Mode to be a good way to utilize all the characters and check out all the stages, at least those I didn't get a chance to in story mode. But beyond this, you have of course Options Mode and Training, which for the latter I utilized to gain a better understanding of which attacks and combos work best and just practicing some lengthy combos in general. But to close out this video with a nice little bow on top, let's discuss our overall opinion on Infinite World, the good and the mediocre. Starting off with the pros. Infinite World was an incredible experience for me. I cannot stress that enough. With Budokai 3 not only just being one of my favorite of the original trilogy, but one of my favorite DBZ games of all time, this felt like an obvious progression to the series had they not gone with Budokai Tenkaichi instead. I absolutely love the way they pay homage to and utilize aspects from all 3 of the Budokai entries. It really feels like one final love letter to the Budokai series and DBZ games on the PS2 as a whole. And realistically, they didn't even have to do this. I mean, they probably were aware this wouldn't sell the best, especially given its time of release. However, and I don't mean this in such a negative way, but Infinite World doesn't really feel like Budokai 4. That's because the key upgrades from Budokai 1 to 2 and 2 to 3 just felt much more apparent than those from 3 to Infinite World. In fact, as we discussed, Infinite World carries over a lot from those games. But given the fact it was released at a very affordable price point, and even still is certainly a great game, I have no issue considering this the official Budokai 3.5 or even hell, Budokai 3.8. It has my favorite combat system by far in probably any DBZ game, and a pretty solid roster to boot. No character to me feels like a blatant cheap rip from another one like some games tend to do. As for the game's cons, no world tournament is surely a huge one. Also, if I'm being a bit picky, from my experience, having to back out of story mode and jump into shop and then jump back into story mode simply to purchase supers for characters that are upcoming in battles, well, that became quite annoying and time consuming. And the massive difficulty spikes, especially to the Frieza fight, felt a bit out of place for a DBZ game. But to tell you the truth, in my personal preference, I kinda like that, because it makes you feel like you're really putting in work for all these skills. Anyway, to sum this up, this game is absolutely worth your time, DBZ fan or not. Alright guys, if you made it this far into the video, I'm really impressed. Thank you so much for watching this entire thing. And as always, make sure to leave a like, comment below on what's your favorite of the 9, and if you enjoy the video. I appreciate it. Become a member if you want. And as always, see you next time. Peace.